It was just past midnight when the call came through. I was sitting alone in the sheriff's office, the hum of the old fluorescent light above me mixing with the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. Most nights in this town are slow, predictable even. But I've learned that when the phone rings after midnight, it's never good news. I picked it up and tried to sound steady, though my voice cracked from the long silence of the shift. "Sheriff's office," I said. At first, there was nothing, just a faint static, like someone breathing too close to the receiver. I was about to hang up when a woman's voice came through, thin, trembling. She spoke quickly, as if afraid that if she stopped for even a second, something would catch up to her. There's someone in the cemetery," she whispered. "They're moving between the graves. I can see them from my window." Her words clung to me. This wasn't the kind of call you brushed off. I sat up straighter. "Who is this?" But she didn't answer that. She just repeated herself, almost pleading. "They're not supposed to be here. Please. Someone has to come." And then the line went dead. I sat there holding the receiver, listening to the empty buzz. Calls like that, you don't ignore them. Even if it turns out to be nothing, you check, because the alternative, the what if, is worse. The clock ticked once, loud in the silence. I grabbed my coat, my hat, and the keys to the cruiser. The town was asleep when I stepped outside. No cars on the road, no porch lights burning, just a still, heavy fog rolling in from the river, swallowing the street lamps one by one. The cemetery sat on the far edge of town, past the hills and the old sawmill, and the roads leading there always seemed darker than anywhere else. I started the engine, and the cruiser's headlights cut through the mist in weak, narrow beams. The radio crackled, empty. No chatter tonight, just me, the fog, and that voice still echoing in my head. As I pulled out onto the road, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Probably just a drunk cutting through the cemetery. Maybe a couple of kids playing some midnight dare. God knows they've done worse in that graveyard. But the way she sounded, there was something about it. Not just fear. It was like she had seen something she couldn't explain, and her mind hadn't caught up yet. The roads twisted through farmland and patches of forest, and with each turn, the fog grew thicker, clinging to the glass, pressing in around the cruiser like it wanted to swallow me whole. I kept one hand tight on the wheel, the other resting near the radio mic just in case. But no words came, just silence. Somewhere along the way, I realized I was holding my breath. I let it out, slow. My headlights caught the shapes of fence posts, a scattering of crows perched like sentries, their black eyes glinting. They didn't move as I passed. They just watched. There's a kind of loneliness that creeps in during these drives. Not the kind you feel when you're home alone or when you've lost someone. No, it's deeper. Like the world is folded in on itself and you're the only one left moving through it. That's what the fog does. It cuts you off. Makes you forget there's anyone else alive out there. I gripped the wheel tighter. A mile out from the cemetery, I slowed down. The road curved into a tunnel of trees. Their branches knotted together overhead, blocking out what little moonlight managed to seep through. My headlights brushed over the trunks, the roots pushing up through the cracked asphalt like the earth itself was trying to reclaim the road. It was colder here. I turned up the heater, but the chill settled deep in a place warmth couldn't reach. I thought again about the voice, that whispering, desperate tone. There was no name, no address, just the cemetery. Just someone moving between the graves. The thought made me press down harder on the gas, though every instinct in me told me to slow down, to turn back. Finally, through the fog, I saw it, the rusted iron gates of Pine Hollow Cemetery. They stood crooked, one hinge broken, one side leaning out as if trying to escape the land it was meant to protect. I pulled the cruiser to a stop just outside. Killed the engine. The quiet was immediate, heavy. I sat there for a moment, staring through the windshield, waiting. Nothing moved, but that didn't mean nothing was there. I opened the door, the creak louder than it should have been, and stepped into the fog. The air was damp, carrying the faint smell of soil and decaying leaves. My boots crunched on gravel as I walked up to the gate. Beyond the iron bars, the cemetery stretched out, row after row of crooked headstones swallowed in mist. The place had always unsettled me, even in daylight. Too many graves, too many years, and not enough visitors to keep the place from falling into ruin. Now, in the fog, it looked endless. I stood there, listening. At first, nothing. Just the faint rustle of leaves. The distant croak of a frog. Then, something else. A sound so soft I almost thought I imagined it. A whisper, not words, not yet. Just the shape of a voice carried on the fog. I froze. My hand drifted toward the revolver at my side, but I didn't draw it. Not yet. The whisper faded. I took a breath, steadying myself, and stepped through the gate. Inside, the fog was thicker, pressing close. The headstones leaned at odd angles, their names weathered away. Some were nothing more than slabs of stone, their markings long gone. I moved slowly, my flashlight beam cutting a narrow path through the gray. Every so often, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the light, a figure slipping between the graves. But when I turned, there was nothing. Only fog, only silence. I kept walking. Each step echoed louder than the last, though there was no reason for it. The ground was soft, damp. My boots sank slightly into the earth. Still, the sound carried, as if the cemetery itself wanted me to know I wasn't welcome, and then the whisper returned, closer this time. I stopped dead in my tracks, holding my breath. The voice seemed to come from just ahead, curling out from the fog, sliding past my ears. I couldn't make out the words. Just the sound of someone speaking low, almost tender. I shone my flashlight forward, but the beam seemed to dissolve before it touched anything. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. I wanted to call out, to say something, to demand whoever was there show themselves. But my throat closed tight and no sound came. Instead, I just stood there, heart pounding, listening to that whispering voice drift between the graves. And for the first time that night, I realized something. The call I had gotten, the woman's voice. It hadn't sounded like she was calling from her home. It had sounded like she was already here, already inside the cemetery. I stood there longer than I should have. My breath caught in the back of my throat, listening to that faint whisper drift through the fog. It didn't sound like any voice I knew. It didn't even sound right. There was something off in the way it carried, thin and stretched, as if it was slipping through cracks that shouldn't exist. I forced myself to take a step forward, then another. My boots sank deeper into the damp soil, and each movement seemed to stir the fog, sending little shivers of mist curling around the headstones. The whisper grew clearer the further I went. At first, I thought it was one voice. Then I realized it wasn't. It was many. Dozens, maybe more, all speaking at once in low tones, a tangle of murmurs that rose and fell together like the tide. I stopped and aimed my flashlight across the graves. The beam wavered as my hand trembled, glancing over names half swallowed by moss and stone too weathered to read. And then I heard it. A word, my name, whispered from somewhere close by. I froze, the blood draining from my face. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. No one knew I was here. The fog pressed closer, muffling the world until all I could hear was my own heartbeat and the steady stream of whispers spilling from the graves. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the wind. That sounds in the fog could warp and bend, make you hear what you wanted or feared to hear. But deep down, I didn't believe it. I crouched near one of the stones and pressed my ear close, half thinking I'd find a radio hidden in the grass or some prank speaker set up by kids. But there was nothing, just the rough chill of stone and the cold, damp air. Still, the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder. I backed away quickly, stumbling over uneven ground, my beam catching on a statue of an angel whose face had worn smooth with age. For a moment in the dim light it looked faceless, watching me without eyes. I swallowed hard and kept moving deeper into the cemetery. Everywhere I turned, the whispers followed. Some high and thin like children, others low and guttural, dragging across the air like gravel. But no matter how many voices there were, they all seemed to be speaking in unison, rising and falling in the same rhythm. I couldn't understand the words. Not really. but the cadence was clear. It was the sound of prayer, or something like it. I reached a clearing near the center of the cemetery where the graves were older. The headstones here were cracked, some toppled over, the writing eroded to nothing. I swept the flashlight across them, my breath fogging the beam. That's when I saw it. The ground ahead of me was disturbed. Fresh dirt, mounded high where a grave had been dug not long ago. The earth was dark and wet, and the shovel marks were still sharp, but there was no coffin. No sign of what or who had been buried there. The whispers swelled, circling me like a current. I turned, shining the light wildly, half expecting to see figures stepping out from behind the stones. But there was no one. Only the graves, only the fog, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the voices were coming from beneath the ground. That thought rooted me in place. I tried to breathe, but every inhale felt shallow, every exhale stolen by the mist. My name came again, whispered softer now, almost coaxing. I couldn't tell from where. It could have been beneath my feet. It could have been from every grave around me. I took a shaky step back and my boot caught on something hard. I stumbled, and when I looked down, my flashlight revealed another stone marker, smaller than the others, a child's grave. The whispering grew sharper, cutting into my ears until I thought I might scream just to drown it out. And then, just as sudden as it began, it stopped. The silence was worse. My ears rang with it. My chest ached with it. I waited for the voices to return, bracing myself, but nothing came. Just the weight of the fog and the stillness of the dead. I thought about turning back then, leaving, pretending none of this happened. But the memory of that woman's call, that desperate plea, rooted me to the spot. If she was here, if she was still alive, I couldn't just walk away. So I kept moving. Every step deeper into the cemetery felt heavier than the last. The silence pressed against me, thick and suffocating. The headstones loomed on either side, crooked shadows in the mist. My flashlight beam flickered once, then steadied, and then I saw it. At the far end of the cemetery, perched on the rise of a hill, was a figure, tall, motionless, standing between two leaning headstones. The fog curled around it. But even through the haze, I could tell it wasn't just a trick of the mist. Someone or something was there. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, a dark silhouette against the pale fog. My throat went dry. I raised the flashlight higher, trying to cut through the distance, but the beam refused to land on it. No matter how I angled the light, the figure stayed in shadow, untouched. For a long moment, neither of us moved, and then, without warning, the whispers returned. Not from the graves this time, from the figure itself. The whispers rose and fell like a tide, spilling from the figure on the hill. My stomach clenched as the sound poured over me, not just into my ears, but into my bones. I could feel it rattling inside like something alive trying to crawl out. I wanted to call out, demand it stop, but my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. All I could do was stand there, frozen, my flashlight shaking in my grip. The figure moved, slow, deliberate. It didn't walk like a man. It glided, each step too smooth, like the fog itself carried it forward. The whispers grew louder with each shift, blending into one endless voice. I stumbled backward, my boot sinking into the wet earth, and nearly fell. My light cut across headstones, skeletal trees, empty ground. When I raised it again, the figure was gone. The whispers cut off. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. I turned in circles, sweeping the light. The fog pressed in tighter, smothering everything. My chest ached with every breath. Then to my left, the sound of dirt shifting. I swung the light. A grave, freshly dug. The soil moved, like something beneath was clawing its way up. My knees buckled. For a heartbeat, I thought I was about to see a hand break through the surface, fingers reaching for air. But the dirt went still, and in the corner of my vision, movement. I snapped the light up. The figure stood between two headstones only 20 feet away, as if it had been there the whole time. Tall, featureless, its edges blurred by fog, but its shape sharp enough to burn itself into my sight. It tilted its head. The whispers began again. This time, I heard words. Not all of them, not clearly, but enough. My name, over and over. Pulled apart, drawn out, it spoke my name the way someone might test a lock. I gripped the revolver at my side, but I didn't draw it. Somehow I knew it wouldn't matter. What good was a bullet against something that didn't move like it belonged to this earth? The figure took another step. I backed away, my boots slipping in the wet grass. The fog swirled higher, climbing the graves like smoke. I could barely see 5 feet in front of me now. The light felt useless, weak against whatever this was, and then it stopped, not the figure. The world, the air itself seemed to hold still, heavy and unmoving. The crickets went silent. The frogs stopped calling. Even the wind died. The only thing left was that whisper, spilling from the figure, curling around my ears, seeping into my head. I felt dizzy. My vision blurred at the edges. The ground tilted beneath me, and I nearly fell again. And in that haze, I saw something. Not with my eyes. With my mind, a flash. Cold earth, nails scraping against wood. A face pale and bloated, eyes wide with terror. A coffin lid pressing down. Screams swallowed by soil. I jerked back, the image vanishing, leaving me gasping. My heart hammered against my ribs. The figure had not moved. It stood as still as stone, yet somehow closer. I blinked, and for the briefest moment, I swore there was more than one. Shapes flickering in the fog. Shadows that weren't mine. I ran, not a choice. Not bravery or cowardice, just instinct. I turned and sprinted, my boots pounding the ground, my light bouncing wildly. The fog tore at me, pulling at my clothes, clawing at my skin. Behind me, the whispers swelled, rising into a chorus that seemed to shake the ground itself. I didn't look back. I cut through rows of headstones, past cracked statues and broken fences until my legs burned and my lungs screamed. I didn't stop until I saw the faint outline of the cemetery gates through the mist. I slowed, gasping for air, my chest on fire. I turned, raising the light, half expecting to see the figure right behind me. But the hill was empty. The whispers were gone. I stood there, trembling, the beam of my flashlight quivering across empty graves. For a moment, I thought maybe it had ended, that I'd imagined the whole thing, that exhaustion and fear had twisted the night into something it wasn't. Then I saw it, near the gate. A fresh grave. I hadn't noticed it before. The dirt was dark and damp, the mound sharp, and lying across it was a telephone receiver. Old, cracked, its cord trailing into the soil as if buried deep below. The same static hiss I'd heard on the call buzzed faintly from the earpiece, and beneath it, a whisper. I stood frozen at the sight of that receiver. The fog swirled around it, curling like smoke rising from the dirt. I should have turned away. I should have walked back to my cruiser and driven until the cemetery was nothing but a bad dream. But I couldn't. Something about it pulled me closer, like a hand on my shoulder pressing me forward. I crouched, my knees popping, and reached out with a trembling hand. The receiver was cold, damp with soil. The static hummed against my ear the moment I lifted it. "Hello?" My voice cracked, the static shifted. Then, breathing, low, ragged, and then the woman's voice, the same one from the call. "They're here," she whispered. "They're all here." My throat went dry. "Where are you?" But she didn't answer. Only the sound of earth shifting, muffled, like she was speaking from beneath it. I dropped the receiver. It landed with a dull thud in the dirt. I staggered back, my flashlight beam cutting across the grave markers. And for a split second, I saw faces. Dozens of them, eyes open, mouths moving. Pressed against the inside of the stones, as though the headstones themselves were holding them in. I blinked, and they were gone. The fog thickened, heavy with the weight of silence. I felt watched. Every inch of my skin prickled as though unseen eyes tracked my every move. I tried to steady my breathing, but it came in ragged gasps. Somewhere behind me, dirt crumbled. I spun, light trembling in my hand. The grave where the receiver had lain was shifting again. The soil pulsed, rising and falling as if something beneath was struggling for air. And then, a hand broke through, gray, swollen, fingernails cracked and caked with soil. It clawed at the air, grasping. I stumbled back, revolver finally drawn, though I knew it wouldn't matter. Another hand tore free, then a shoulder, then the outline of a face. Eyes rolled white, mouth opening in a soundless scream, and as it pulled itself free, the whispers returned. Louder than ever, not one voice, not dozens, thousands. Every grave around me trembled. The ground quaked as if the whole cemetery breathed as one. I backed toward the gate, gun shaking in my hand as figures began to rise from the soil. Not whole, not living. Shadows spilling from bodies, faces blurred, shapes flickering in and out of the fog. They didn't lunge. They didn't rush me. They just stood, watching. Silent witnesses. The one from the fresh grave staggered to its feet. Its lips moved, the sound scraping from its throat like stones grinding together. My name, again. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee into the night and never return. But my legs wouldn't move. The figure raised a hand, pointing past me. Toward the gate. Toward the world beyond. And for the first time, I understood. The cemetery wasn't keeping them in. It was keeping us out. The whispers swelled. A wave of sound crashing against me, rattling my teeth. My vision blurred. My knees buckled. I dropped the gun, clutching my ears. I don't remember falling, only waking. I was lying outside the cemetery gates, the fog lifting with the first light of dawn. The graves lay still, the whispers gone. The receiver was gone, too. Only the disturbed soil remained, dark and wet, as though nothing had ever clawed its way out. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know the dead are not silent. I've been the sheriff of this small town for almost 20 years now. And there are places around here I thought I knew like the back of my hand. Every dirt road, every broken fence, every field where the grass grows too tall. But the truth is, some places they hide. They sit quiet, waiting until the years slip by. And then one day you stumble across them and you wonder how you never noticed before. That's how I felt the day I found the old gate. It was late afternoon, sky heavy with clouds, and I was walking the edge of the graveyard. Not the front part, the one people still visit with flowers and neat rows of headstones. I was further back where the ground sloped into a mess of weeds and tangled trees. I'd gone out there looking for a lost dog someone reported. A boy's beagle, gone 2 nights now. I told myself I was just being thorough, but deep down I knew I wouldn't find it. I remember brushing past the tall grass, swatting at gnats, and then hearing it. A long, thin creak, like metal being pushed, slow and painful. It came from somewhere ahead of me, buried in the overgrowth. I stopped, listened. The sound came again, carried by the wind. A hinge crying out, and that's when I saw it, the top curve of an iron gate poking through the branches. I froze, staring at it because I had walked this graveyard countless times and never once had I seen a gate back here. My boots sank into the soft earth as I stepped closer, pulling away vines thick as rope. The more I uncovered, the more of it I saw. Rust ate through the black iron, the bars bent and split with age. The gate itself was narrow, set into a crumbling stone wall that barely stood higher than my waist. The wall stretched off in both directions, swallowed by brush, as if trying to keep something in, or keep something out. I reached out, my hand brushing against the cold iron. The metal felt rough, scaly beneath my fingers. The gate swayed. It wasn't the wind that moved it. It shifted forward just enough to creak against its hinges, like someone on the other side had tugged it and then let go. I told myself it was the breeze, but my mouth had already gone dry. I pulled it open. The screech that followed set my teeth on edge, high and sharp, echoing into the trees around me. I half expected someone to come running, angry at me for disturbing the silence. But no one came. Only the wind through the grass, only the clouds darkening overhead. Inside the wall was another section of the cemetery. Smaller, tighter, forgotten. The graves there were different. The stones were worn down to nubs, names erased by weather and time. Some markers were nothing but crooked wooden boards, half rotted, leaning as though ashamed to be seen. I counted maybe 20 in all, scattered like broken teeth across the plot. A smell lingered there, faint but sour. Damp soil mixed with something older, something that hadn't seen air in years. I took a slow step forward. It felt wrong to be in there. Not dangerous exactly, but unwelcome. Like I had walked into a room where someone was already sitting in the dark, waiting, and I just hadn't seen them yet. I remember whispering under my breath, as though I needed to explain myself. "Just looking for the dog." "Won't be long," my voice sounded thin, out of place. I checked the ground for tracks, but the dirt was thick with roots and dead leaves. No paw prints, no sign of anything living. Still, I walked the length of the plot, tracing each grave with my eyes. The silence pressed down heavier with every step. At the far end, I found a headstone that stood taller than the rest. The letters were faint, almost unreadable, but I knelt down and brushed the dirt away with my thumb. "Children of the Forgotten," it said. Not a name, not even dates, just that. The words sent a chill crawling up my spine. I stood there, staring, wondering what it meant. Was it a family plot? Some old charity section where pauper children had been buried? Nobody in town had ever mentioned it, and I'd been here long enough to know most of the stories. The sky above me grumbled with thunder. A storm rolling in. I turned back toward the gate. That's when I noticed something. The gate was swinging shut. I stopped dead, heart knocking hard in my chest. The air was still. No wind now. Yet the iron moved with purpose, closing slow until the latch touched stone. I hurried forward and caught it with my hand before it could seal. The hinge shrieked, and I swear to God, for one split second I felt pressure on the other side. Like something was pulling against me, not strong but steady. Testing. I yanked it wide open and stepped out of the wall. My breath came fast, too fast, and I laughed nervously just to hear a sound that wasn't the creak of metal. It was nothing, I told myself. Just the storm wind, just my imagination. But when I looked back through the opening, the graves seemed different. Closer together, shadows pooling where no shadows should have been. I shut the gate behind me and didn't touch it again. Walking back, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time a branch cracked under my boot, I thought I heard another sound following, softer, lighter, almost like a second set of steps. By the time I reached the open part of the cemetery, the world felt normal again. The air smelled of rain, the grass bent in the wind, and I could almost laugh at myself for being spooked by a piece of rusty iron. But I kept thinking about that stone. Children of the Forgotten. Those words wouldn't leave me. That night, I dreamed of the gate. I heard it creak open in the dark, heard it slam shut. I woke up sweating, my throat dry, the echo of those hinges still ringing in my ears. And when I got dressed in the morning, something made me check my boots. The soles were caked with dirt. Black, clotted dirt. The kind I hadn't stepped in anywhere else but inside that hidden plot. The next morning, I told myself I wasn't going back. I had no reason to. The dog was still missing, sure, but I knew that poor creature was long gone. Coyotes, cars, whatever. Things disappear out here all the time. What I'd seen at the graveyard had nothing to do with the dog, and nothing to do with my job, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That phrase on the headstone circled in my head all day. Children of the Forgotten. It repeated like a whisper, coming back no matter how many times I shoved it away. By afternoon, I caught myself driving the patrol car past the graveyard again, slow, like my eyes needed to check that the gate was still there, like I was making sure I hadn't dreamed it. I parked at the edge of the road and sat there for a long minute, hands on the wheel, tapping my thumb against the horn. I told myself I was just checking, that's all. A sheriff ought to know what's inside his own town, so I went back in. The clouds were thinner that day, streaks of pale light breaking through. The main part of the cemetery was quiet, the grass wet with dew, the air cool. I walked straight to the back, my boots carrying me down the same slope, through the same tangle of weeds. The gate stood waiting. Rusted iron, crooked wall, all of it exactly as I remembered. Only this time the gate wasn't closed. It hung wide open. A stillness sank over me, the kind that makes the hairs rise along your arms and neck. I hadn't touched it since yesterday. No one else knew it was back here. And yet the iron mouth gaped, daring me to step inside. I did. The graves looked no different. Old stones, broken boards, that same sour earth. But the silence pressed thicker. It felt like stepping underwater. I walked slowly, scanning the dirt for any sign of the boy's dog. That's what I told myself anyway. But my eyes weren't really looking for paw prints. They were searching for something else, something I didn't want to find. And then I saw them. Not dog tracks, footprints, tiny ones. They ran across the soft dirt between two graves, faint but clear. Small bare feet pressed into the soil, toes and heels marked in detail. Too small for any adult, too perfect to be made by shoes. I crouched, staring. My breath fogged the air. The prints led from one headstone to another, then vanished into the tangle of grass at the edge of the plot. I followed, heart pounding. The trail stopped just short of the wall. The last print was deeper than the others, as though the child, if it was a child, had pressed harder before disappearing. I reached out and touched the soil. It was damp, fresh. Every thought in me rebelled. There were no children buried here that could walk. There were no children out here at all. This section of the cemetery hadn't seen visitors in decades. I stood up fast, eyes scanning the headstones, and that's when I saw it. Something carved into the tall stone at the far end. Yesterday I swore it only read, "Children of the Forgotten." But now, below the words, faint letters stretched across the surface, as if they'd been there all along, hiding under dirt until the rain washed them clean. They still play. That's what it said. My throat closed. The air around me felt heavier, like someone was leaning close, watching my reaction. I backed toward the gate, moving slow, not turning my back on the graves. Every step I took, the silence deepened, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When I finally stepped outside the wall, the air felt lighter. But my skin still crawled. I pulled the gate shut behind me. The metal shrieked, long and sharp, and I whispered under my breath, "Stay closed." The rest of the day, I couldn't concentrate. My deputy asked if I was sick. I told him I was fine, just tired. But inside my head, all I could see were those footprints, tiny and impossibly fresh, pressed into the earth where no child should walk. That night, I dreamed again. In the dream, I was standing at the gate. The iron was wide open, and from inside the plot came laughter. High, sharp laughter, the kind that only children make when they're running circles around each other. I couldn't see them. I could only hear them, their giggles weaving between the graves, and then small hands wrapped around my fingers. I woke with a jerk, clutching my hand to my chest. My palm tingled as if touched. Sleep didn't come back after that. The next morning, I drove to the records office. I told myself I was just doing my job, checking history. Maybe there was some explanation, some note in the town's past that would put my mind at ease. But the records told me nothing. The section of land behind the cemetery wasn't even marked. No mention of the stone wall, the gate, the graves, as though that whole place didn't exist. And yet, it did. I knew it did. I drove back again, against every ounce of reason in me. The sun was already setting, the sky burning orange. I told myself I'd just take one last look before putting the whole thing out of my mind. The gate was waiting. This time I didn't hesitate. I stepped inside, straight toward the tall headstone. The words were there, clear as ever. Children of the Forgotten, they still play. And at the base of the stone, pressed into the dirt, were more footprints, dozens of them. Little feet, circling the stone in a wild, frantic dance. I turned, my chest tight, eyes sweeping the graves. The silence was too much, the air too still. I whispered into the emptiness, voice cracking, "Where are you?" Nothing answered, but when I stepped back, I thought I saw movement between the stones. A flicker, a shadow darting low, too quick to catch. My heart raced. I didn't wait. I left the plot, slammed the gate, and didn't look back. But even now, as I sit here writing this down, I can still feel them, tiny hands brushing against mine in the dark. I told myself I was finished. After that last night, After seeing the footprints circle the stone like a dance, I swore I wouldn't go back. A man's got to know his limits, and mine had been pushed too far already. But the thing about fear is, it follows you. I kept hearing them. Not in the graveyard, not in the woods, here in my own house. Soft, pattering sounds across the floorboards when the lights were low. A brush against my leg when I sat too still. Sometimes, in the deep hours of the night, I felt the corner of my blanket tug, gentle but insistent, like a child trying to wake me. And always, that whisper, they still play. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. Stress, fatigue. Lord knows a sheriff carries enough on his shoulders. But deep down, I knew the truth. I'd opened the gate. I'd stepped inside. And whatever lingered in that plot had followed me out. 3 nights later, I heard the singing. It began faint, drifting through the window near my bed. A soft melody, too distant to catch the words. It wasn't a woman's voice. It wasn't a man's. It was higher, fragile. The kind of lullaby you'd hum to a baby in the dark. I sat up, heart pounding, every part of me knowing exactly where it came from. The graveyard. I should have stayed in bed. Should have pulled the covers over my head like a child and prayed for morning, but I couldn't. The sound pulled at me, slow and sweet, tugging like a hook buried in my chest. So I dressed, strapped on my gun out of habit, and stepped outside. The night was heavy, clouds swallowing the stars, the air still as death. I walked the road alone, boots crunching on gravel, each step slower than the last. The lullaby never faded. It floated just ahead of me, soft as breath, always close enough to follow. By the time I reached the graveyard gates, my skin was crawling. The main section of graves lay quiet, shadows bending between stones. I didn't need to think about where to go. My feet carried me to the back, through the weeds, down the slope, to that rusted iron mouth. The gate was open again. The singing flowed through it, clearer now. I could almost hear the words, broken, drawn-out syllables that made no sense. My chest tightened with every note. I stepped inside. The graves waited, silent. The headstone at the far end gleamed pale, its letters sharp under the moonlight. Children of the Forgotten. They still play, and around me the singing rose not from one voice, from many dozens. It wove through the air, circling me, a choir of children's voices humming in the dark. My breath caught, my knees trembling as I turned in place, searching the shadows. But the graves were empty. Then I saw it, movement between the stones, shapes darting low, pale against the black. Small figures, quick and restless, weaving between the graves. I blinked hard, but they didn't vanish this time. They were real, children, or what was left of them. Their skin was pale as chalk, their eyes hollow pits that glimmered faintly as though reflecting a light I couldn't see. Their limbs were thin, too thin, moving in strange jerks, yet somehow graceful. They skipped between the markers, circling the headstone, hands clasped in silent games of ring around the rosy, and all the while, they sang. That lullaby. The sound dug under my skin, turned my stomach inside out. It wasn't meant for comfort. It was meant for binding, for holding me there, rooted to the spot. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. One of them broke away from the circle. A girl, no older than 7 when she must have died. She drifted toward me, her bare feet silent on the dirt, her hollow eyes fixed on mine. She raised her hand and reached for me. My body screamed to move, but I couldn't. I felt her fingers brush mine, cold, damp, softer than anything I'd ever touched. A shiver tore through me, freezing me in place. Then more came. Small hands tugging at my coat, pulling at my belt, pressing against my arms. I felt them swarming, surrounding me, their voices rising higher, sharper. And in that awful harmony, I finally understood the words. Sleep, little one. Stay with us. Stay with us. Sleep. I forced myself to speak, my voice breaking, raw. What do you want from me? The singing stopped. All at once. The silence slammed into me so hard I nearly fell to my knees. Dozens of hollow eyes stared up at me, unblinking, waiting. Then the girl's voice came, flat and thin, but clear. You opened the gate. I swallowed. my throat burning. "I didn't mean to." "You let us out." Her words crawled into my skull, heavy as stone, and then together they whispered, "Now you stay." The circle closed tighter, hands gripping me harder. The sour smell of earth filled my nose, stronger now, choking. I struggled, yanking my arms free, stumbling back. My hand went for my gun, but the weight of it felt useless, obscene, against something like this. The children only watched, heads tilting, eyes empty. I turned and ran. I don't remember how I got past the gate. Don't remember how I tore through the weeds or reached the road. My lungs burned. My legs nearly gave out. But I didn't stop until I was inside my house. Door slammed, every lock thrown, and still, the singing followed, faint, drifting through the walls, clinging to me long into the night. That was weeks ago. Since then, I've tried everything. I burned sage. I prayed. I even nailed the doors shut on the old church across town, hoping something holy might bleed into me. Nothing works. Every night when the hour turns darkest, I hear them, the lullaby. It starts soft, like breath against glass. Then it grows, circling the house, wrapping me in sound. I hear footsteps in the hall, laughter slipping under the door. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel them climbing onto the bed, their weight pressing down the mattress, their hands brushing my face. I don't sleep anymore. Not really. Just drift in and out, waiting for dawn, praying they'll vanish with the sun. But dawn isn't safety. Not anymore. This morning I found footprints in the yard. Small bare feet pressed into the mud, circling the house in patterns too wild to follow. And on my porch, a song, carved into the wood, jagged and uneven, but clear enough to read, "Stay with us, stay with us. I don't know how much longer I can resist. The pull is too strong. My body aches with it. My mind blurs every time the lullaby begins. I fear that one night soon, I'll step outside and follow the voices back to the graveyard, back through the gate, back to the stone where they dance. And when I do, I don't think I'll be coming back. If anyone finds this, if anyone cares enough to look, don't go near that wall. Don't touch that gate. The children are waiting, and they never forget." I remember the first night the fog rolled in thicker than I had ever seen before. It wasn't the kind of mist that floats across the riverbanks in the early mornings. This was heavier, darker, almost alive. I had been the sheriff of this county for over a decade, and I'd driven that road past the graveyard more times than I could count. But that night, something felt wrong. The beam of my headlights barely cut through it. 10 feet ahead, everything turned into a white wall. My knuckles gripped the steering wheel tighter, the leather creaking under my hand. I slowed the car to a crawl, the tires crunching over gravel. The silence of the fog pressed in on me. No crickets, no owls, not even the wind. Just the low hum of the engine and my own breathing. I told myself it was just another foggy night. Nothing more. But deep down, I felt the weight of it. Like the fog wasn't just covering the earth, it was swallowing it. The graveyard sat on the edge of town, tucked against the woods. Folks didn't come out here much anymore, except on Sundays or the odd funeral. Old stones, weathered and leaning, rows of names nobody remembered. My father used to tell me the ground never stopped shifting out there, that even the dead weren't allowed to rest easy in that soil. I used to laugh at him. That night I didn't. The road curved and narrowed, and soon I was driving alongside the wrought iron fence of the cemetery. The fog clung to it, softening the sharp black lines, making the fence seem to vanish into nothing. I rolled down the window, trying to get a sense of the night air. It was damp, heavy, carrying the smell of wet earth and rust, the smell of graves. I slowed to a stop near the gate. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe? Or maybe I was listening for something. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps in the fog, soft, dragging, uneven, like someone moving just out of sight. I cut the engine and sat there, my ears straining. Nothing. Just silence so deep it pressed against my eardrums. I should have turned the car around. Gone back home. Called it a night. But that's not what sheriffs do. People look to us to be steady, even when we're not. Especially when we're not. So I grabbed my flashlight from the passenger seat and stepped out into the fog. The cold wrapped around me like wet cloth. I could feel the dampness sinking into my uniform, clinging to my skin. My boots crunched against the gravel as I walked to the gate. The beam of my flashlight cut a narrow path through the mist. But beyond that, Nothing. Just shifting gray. I told myself I was checking the cemetery, making sure no kids were sneaking in, no drifters setting up camp among the stones. But, if I'm being honest, I didn't believe that. Not really. I just felt pulled in, like the fog itself wanted me there. I pushed open the gate. The hinges groaned like a dying thing, echoing far too loud in the silence. My breath came out in short clouds, hanging in the air before dissolving into the gray. I moved slowly down the path, flashlight sweeping over the headstones. Names flickered into view and disappeared again. McAllister, Green, Tully. Old families, long gone. The deeper I went, the thicker the fog seemed to grow. My light caught on patches of damp grass, wilted flowers left long ago, a cracked angel statue leaning forward as if whispering a secret to the ground. I tried to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, but it pressed against me all the same. I stopped beside a row of graves I didn't recognize. The ground here seemed uneven, softer somehow. I crouched, pressing the toe of my boot into the soil. It gave too easily, like fresh dirt. But these graves were supposed to be decades old. A sound carried through the fog, low, muffled. At first I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. Then I thought maybe an animal, something moving through the underbrush, but it didn't sound like that either. It sounded human. I stood up straight, shining my light into the gray. Hello? My voice sounded too loud, almost harsh against the silence. No reply. Just more fog, curling and shifting like smoke. I told myself again that it was nothing. The fog plays tricks on your ears, bends sound in strange ways. But even as I tried to believe it, the hair on the back of my neck rose. My heart started to thump harder, echoing in my chest. I pressed on. My boots sank into the damp earth, leaving impressions that filled slowly with water. The mist tasted metallic like old coins held on the tongue. My throat tightened as I swallowed against it. Every few steps I glanced back toward the gate, but it had already vanished behind me. The fog had swallowed it whole. That's when I realized if I lost my way out here, I might not find it again. The thought crawled into my mind and stayed there, cold and unwelcome. I walked slower, marking each step, listening hard for anything beyond the sound of my own boots. Somewhere ahead, I heard it again. That dragging step, that uneven rhythm, closer this time. I swung the flashlight forward, cutting across the stones, the crooked crosses, the tilted slabs of granite. Nothing. Just fog. But I swear I saw movement. A shadow breaking against the gray, too tall, too still. My beam hit it for half a second and then it was gone, like the fog had folded back over it. I told myself it was just a trick of the eyes, but my hand shook on the flashlight and I couldn't stop the cold that spread through my chest. I thought about calling out again, but something inside me stopped me, the kind of instinct you don't argue with. I just stood there, breathing hard, trying to hear over the sound of my own pulse. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds, it was hard to tell. Time felt strange inside that fog, like the world outside had stopped, and I was the only thing still moving. Finally, I turned back toward the car. My duty was done. There was nothing out here, nothing I could explain at least. And yet, as I walked, the fog seemed to close in tighter, as if it didn't want me leaving. The silence pressed harder, almost painful now. My ears buzzed with it. My chest ached. I quickened my pace, my flashlight beam jittering across the ground, bouncing off stones. When I reached the gate again, relief washed through me. The shape of it loomed out of the mist, black and familiar. I stepped through, pulling it shut behind me. The clang echoed too long, like the sound was being stretched. I got back into my car and started the engine. The headlights lit up the fog, two weak cones swallowed almost instantly. My hands shook on the wheel as I shifted into gear. Driving away, I told myself it was just fog, just weather, just my imagination. But as I left the graveyard behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't just driven into the fog. I had driven into something else entirely. Something that had seen me and wasn't done with me yet, and that was only the beginning. I should have gone home that night. I should have driven straight past the cemetery, ignored the fog, and never set foot on that ground. But sleep wouldn't come to me when I got back to the station. My hands still trembled on the desk, my mind replaying the crunch of my boots on the soft soil, the dragging step I thought I heard, the shadow that didn't belong. I told myself I'd imagined it. A tired mind, a foggy night, that was all. But by morning, something gnawed at me, something about that patch of ground, softer than it should have been. My father's words echoed again, about how the soil never stopped shifting out there. I laughed at them when I was younger, but not now. Not after last night. By afternoon, I was back on that road. The fog hadn't lifted. If anything, it had thickened, rolling in heavy waves that blurred the trees, the fence, the very sky itself. It was like the world beyond the cemetery didn't exist anymore. Just me, the car, and the endless gray. I parked near the gate again. The air was colder this time, sharp enough to bite the inside of my nose when I breathed. My flashlight was still on the passenger seat. I took it, but part of me knew the light wouldn't help much. The fog swallowed light, drank it down until only the darkness underneath remained. The gate groaned louder than before when I pushed it open. My boots followed the same path I had taken the night before, past the angel statue, past the leaning stones. I moved slow, careful. My ears strained for any sound, but all I could hear was the faint thump of my own heart. The patch of ground was just as I remembered, uneven, darker, damp with moisture. I crouched again, pressing my hand into it. The earth sank under my palm, loose and unsettled. Graves that old shouldn't feel that way. I swept my flashlight across the area. That's when I saw it, something wooden, half-buried, sticking through the soil at an angle. At first I thought it was just a branch, roots pushing up from below. But the beam caught the edges, straight, sharp, unnatural. My chest tightened as I brushed away the dirt with my hand. It wasn't a branch. It was a corner. Weathered wood, black with age, the grain swollen from years beneath the earth. A coffin. I froze there, crouched over it, my breath clouding the air. I told myself it had to be some old grave, forgotten, shifted upward as the ground settled. But the more I uncovered, the more wrong it looked. The coffin wasn't where it should have been. It was tilted, the lid angled upward like something had tried to push it from below. And the soil around it, too fresh, too loose. Like it had been disturbed recently. I leaned closer, my flashlight trembling in my grip. My fingers brushed over the lid, rough and splintered, leaving tiny cuts on my skin. I could smell it. Damp wood, rot, something faintly sweet and sickening beneath it. I should have stopped. Should have marked the place, called someone, written a report. But the fog pressed around me, thick and heavy, and I felt pulled in again. Drawn to that coffin like it had been waiting for me, I dug with my hands, pushing soil aside, uncovering more of the lid. The wood groaned faintly under the weight of the earth. The sound carried too far in the fog, stretching out like a moan. My heart hammered, but I couldn't stop. Soon half the coffin was exposed. It was old, yes, but not rotted through. The iron fittings on the corners were black with rust, yet still strong. The lid seemed intact, though cracked along the seams. That's when I noticed it. The soil around the coffin was marked. Not just disturbed, marked. Long, deep lines carved into the dirt, as if something had been dragged across it. I followed them with my eyes, my flashlight beam shaking as it traced the patterns. They weren't random. They curved and crossed, almost like symbols, almost like writing. A chill went through me so strong it felt like my blood had turned to ice. I backed up a step, my boots sinking into the damp earth with a wet squelch. I wanted to tell myself the marks were natural, roots, animal burrows, anything. But they weren't. They were deliberate. I shone the light back on the coffin. My breath caught in my throat. The lid wasn't just cracked, it was shifted. Just slightly, just enough to leave a dark seam running across it. A seam wide enough to imagine something had pressed against it. From the inside, I staggered back another step, nearly losing my balance. The fog curled tighter, wrapping around me like a noose. The silence deepened until my ears rang with it. And then, I heard it. Not footsteps. Not dragging. This was softer. A faint sound rising from the soil itself, like air escaping, slow and steady, like a breath. I froze, every muscle locked. My light fixed on that seam, on the darkness pressing through it. I waited for movement, for the lid to shift, for a hand to reach out. Nothing came. Only the sound, that slow, terrible breath. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to. But my legs wouldn't listen. I just stood there, breathing too fast, the fog damp against my lips. The sound from the coffin grew louder, like whoever or whatever was inside knew I was there. Knew I was listening. My hand brushed the grip of my revolver. Not that it would have done me any good. You can't shoot what's already in the ground. Still, the weight of it was some comfort, a reminder I wasn't entirely helpless. I whispered to myself, low and broken, "It's nothing. It's just the earth settling. Just the air." But I didn't believe it. Not for a second, I forced myself to step back. One step, then another. The fog shifted as I moved, curling like smoke, hiding the coffin from view. I didn't take my light off it until the last possible moment, until the gray swallowed it whole. I turned and walked quickly back toward the gate. My boots slipped on the wet grass, my breath harsh and loud. I didn't care. I just needed out. When I reached the gate, I slammed it shut behind me and leaned against the bars, chest heaving. The fog pressed up against the other side, thick and endless, as if daring me to come back. But even from there, even with the coffin hidden, I could still hear it. Faint, barely audible, but real. That slow, steady breath, and I knew then the dead in that cemetery weren't resting. Something had been unearthed. Something that wasn't meant to be found. Something that had been waiting. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. The sound of breath leaking from the soil, slow and steady, as if the coffin itself was alive. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my body heavy but my mind racing. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of dirt pressing against my face, of wood splintering under my hands, of something unseen shifting in the fog. By morning, my skin felt clammy, and my heart hadn't stopped its uneven beat. I tried to tell myself I wouldn't go back, that I'd leave it alone, write it off as unsettled ground, nothing more. But when I stepped outside, the fog was still there, hanging low, rolling in from the fields, thicker than before, like it was waiting for me. By late afternoon, I found myself driving the same road again. My headlights pushed weakly against the gray, cutting no more than a few feet ahead. The graveyard loomed in silence. I parked, my hands trembling on the wheel. I sat there for a long time, engine running, telling myself to turn back. But eventually, I shut it off and stepped into the damp quiet. The gate opened with the same groan. The air inside was colder, the fog heavier. I could see only a few steps ahead. I followed the path, heart pounding harder with each crunch of my boots. I hadn't planned on going near the coffin again, not after what I'd heard. But the fog didn't give me much choice. It drew me deeper, pulling me down paths that felt unfamiliar, even though I'd walked them 2 nights in a row. Headstones rose and vanished in the mist. Shapes shifted at the corners of my vision, and then I saw it. Not the coffin, not the marks in the soil. Something else, a figure. At first, it was only an outline, half-formed in the fog. A person standing among the graves, still, silent, watching. My heart lurched. I raised my flashlight, the beam trembling as it cut through the mist. The figure came into view, tall, thin, the shoulders bent strangely, the head tilted, and the face. No eyes. Just hollow sockets blacker than the fog around them, empty, but staring all the same. I froze, my breath catching. My throat tightened as if hands were closing around it. My light shook across that face, desperate to find some detail, some reason to explain it away. But the hollows only seemed to deepen, swallowing the light whole. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My tongue was dry, my voice caught somewhere deep in my chest. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. Just stood there waiting. Finally, I forced words out, ragged and hoarse. "Who's there?" The sound barely carried before the fog ate it. The figure tilted its head further like it was listening. And then, without a sound, it stepped back, into the fog. Gone. I stumbled forward, raising the light, sweeping it across the graves. Nothing. Only mist curling through the stones. No footprints in the soil. No sign that anyone had been there at all, but I knew what I'd seen. I stood there shaking, my ears straining for the faintest sound. Nothing came. Only the silence pressing harder, wrapping around me until it hurt. I should have left then. Walked back to the car, driven away, never looked back. But something in me snapped. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was duty, maybe it was something darker. I couldn't just leave, not when I'd seen it. Not when I felt it was still there, hiding in the gray. I moved forward, deeper into the cemetery, flashlight darting left and right. My breath came fast, fogging in the cold air. Every headstone seemed to lean toward me, every shadow stretched too far. I felt watched from all sides, but whenever I turned, there was nothing. The angel statue appeared in the mist, its wings chipped and cracked, its face worn smooth. I stopped there, my chest heaving, my pulse hammering in my ears, and in that silence, I felt it. Eyes on me, not from behind, not from the sides, from straight ahead. I lifted the flashlight. The figure stood at the edge of the beam again, closer this time. Hollow eyes fixed on me. I froze, the light trembling, my breath choking in my throat. "Stay back," I whispered, though the words barely carried. My hand went to the revolver at my side. My fingers wrapped the grip slick with sweat. The figure didn't move, just stared. Those sockets, black and endless, held me in place, and then, slowly, it lifted a hand. Pale, thin, trembling, it pointed, not at me, at the ground. I followed the gesture with my light. The beam landed on the soil near the base of the angel statue. The dirt was loose, dark, disturbed, like the ground near the coffin. When I looked back up, the figure was gone. I spun in a circle, my flashlight cutting wild paths through the fog. Nothing, just the gray, thick and endless. My chest ached from holding my breath. I let it out in a rush, my knees weak. I wanted to collapse right there, but I forced myself to move. I crouched near the spot it had pointed to. The soil was soft beneath my fingers, too soft, freshly turned. I dug lightly, enough to see the color change, the dark, wet layers beneath. And there, half buried in the dirt, I found it, a piece of wood, splintered, blackened, just like the coffin. I staggered back, nearly tripping over a headstone. My flashlight beam swung wildly as I scrambled to my feet. My breath tore from my chest in shallow gasps. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran through the fog, stumbling over stones, slipping in the wet grass. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, but I didn't stop until I saw the gate looming through the mist. I threw it open and staggered to the car, fumbling with the door handle. My hands shook so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, I slammed the car into gear and tore down the road, headlights cutting useless tunnels into the fog. Only when the cemetery was far behind did I let myself breathe. But even then, even with miles between me and that place, I could still see those hollow eyes staring at me. And worse, I could still feel the weight of that gesture. That hand pointing to the ground, to the soil, to what was waiting beneath. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. What would I even say? That a figure with hollow eyes had pointed to the dirt, showing me something buried under the angel statue? I could already imagine the looks, the polite nods, the murmurs once I left the room. A sheriff losing his mind. That's all they'd think. But the silence in my own house was worse. The ticking of the old clock on the wall, the hum of the fridge, the way the fog pressed against the windows all night, curling in the street lights, thick as smoke. Every sound carried too sharp. Every shadow stretched too long. By the next evening, I knew I'd go back. It wasn't a choice anymore. Something was calling me, and I couldn't ignore it. The fog swallowed the road again, denser than ever. Driving into it felt like driving into a dream, one I couldn't wake from. The gate groaned as I pushed it open, the sound echoing into the gray. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam trembling against the stones. I made my way to the angel statue, every step heavy, every breath tight. The ground at its base still looked disturbed. I crouched, my fingers brushing the damp soil. Loose, wet, like it had been dug recently. I scraped at the dirt, pulling it back. My nails filled with mud, the smell of wet earth clinging to me. And then I heard it. Not breath this time. Words, low, whispered, rising from the soil itself. I froze, my body rigid. The whispers tangled together. Too many voices at once, hushed and urgent. I leaned closer without meaning to, straining to hear. Took her in the night. I buried the knife. No one must know. His blood still stains the stones. I staggered back, my heart hammering. The voices didn't stop. They poured from the ground, layered and endless, like the earth itself was confessing. Crimes, secrets, names I half recognized from old case files. Murders that were never solved. Disappearances that were never explained. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The whispers crawled inside my head, vibrating in my bones. I could feel them in my teeth, in the hollow of my chest. Your father knew. That one cut through the rest. Clear. Cold. I dropped my hands, my breath catching. What? I whispered into the fog. The voices swelled, louder now, pressing in from all sides. I staggered against the statue, my flashlight clattering to the ground. The beam spun wild circles through the mist. Your father dug with his own hands. He put them in the soil. He fed the fog. My legs went weak. I collapsed onto my knees, dirt clinging to my pants. My father, a man I'd idolized, a man who wore this same badge before me. Dead now, buried just miles away. The whispers coiled around me, hissing, pleading, accusing. My breath came in shallow gasps. My chest burned with the weight of it. Stop, I begged. My voice cracked. Please stop. But they didn't. You carry his sins. You wear his badge. You'll finish what he began. I clutched my head, pressing my palms hard against my skull. My vision blurred. The fog thickened until I couldn't tell where the ground ended and the air began. My body shook with the force of those voices tearing through me. Then, silence. All at once. So sudden it felt like the world had ended. My own ragged breathing was the only sound. I stayed on my knees, shaking, waiting for them to return. When I finally lifted my head, the fog had shifted. The statue loomed above me, its stone face worn smooth, its wings broken. And at its base, the soil moved, not like before. Not loose or disturbed. It shifted, like something beneath it was turning. My breath froze in my chest. The dirt rose and fell, in the rhythm of breath. No, I whispered, the soil cracked. A seam split open, blackness yawning beneath. I scrambled backward, hands clawing at the wet grass. My flashlight beam jittered across the ground, and then from that darkness, a voice rose alone. Low, male, clearer than the rest. You were never meant to see this. My body went cold. My father's voice. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. You should have left it buried. The soil closed again, smooth, silent, as if nothing had ever stirred. I sat there shaking, my chest hollow. My father had been dead 10 years. I'd buried him myself. I'd carried his coffin, lowered it into the ground. I'd stood over his grave as the dirt fell. But that voice was his. I forced myself to my feet, my legs trembling, barely holding me up. My light flicked across the stones, but the fog pressed too thick. I stumbled toward the gate, my body heavy, my breath shallow. The whispers followed me, faint but there, carried on the fog. Names I didn't want to know, secrets I didn't want to hear. By the time I reached the car, I was shaking so bad I could hardly get the key in. I slammed the door shut, started the engine, and pressed the gas hard. The headlights cut weak tunnels into the mist, but it didn't matter. The voices were still with me. They didn't stop when I left the cemetery. They didn't stop when I reached town. They didn't stop when I sat in the station, head in my hands, trying to breathe. They whispered all night. In the silence of my house, in the hum of the fridge, in the ticking of the clock, I couldn't escape them. The fog had followed me. And with it, the voices of the earth. I didn't go to work the next morning. Couldn't. My uniform hung on the chair by the bed, the badge glinting faintly in the dull light. I stared at it for a long time, my chest tight, my head heavy with the voices that hadn't left me all night. They'd whispered until dawn, until I thought my skull would split open. Crimes, secrets, sins, and always that one voice, deep and steady, my father's. By noon, the whispers had dulled to a low hum, but the fog outside hadn't lifted. It pressed against the windows like a living thing, pale and endless. I stood at the glass, staring into it, and the longer I looked, the more I swore I saw movement. Shifting shapes, tall, thin figures watching from the gray. I told myself I wouldn't go back. Not again. I'd done enough. I'd seen enough. but the pull was still there, heavy and insistent, like a weight in my chest. The fog wanted me, the graves wanted me, and part of me wanted them too. By evening, I was back on that road. The headlights barely touched the mist. My hands shook on the wheel, sweat slicking my palms. Every turn felt wrong, every mile stretched too long. When the cemetery fence finally appeared, black and crooked through the haze, I felt both relief and dread. I parked by the gate, leaving the engine running this time. Maybe it was foolish, but I wanted something alive behind me, even if it was just the hum of the car. The gate groaned, its cry swallowed by the fog. I stepped inside, flashlight in hand, my breath sharp in the cold air. The cemetery looked different. Stones jutted at new angles, paths curved where they shouldn't. It was as if the ground itself had shifted overnight, reshaping under the weight of the fog. My boots sank deeper than before, the soil soft and sucking at my steps. I didn't head toward the angel statue. Not this time. My feet carried me elsewhere, deeper, toward the corner where I'd first found the coffin. The fog curled thick around me, heavy as water. My flashlight barely cut more than a few feet ahead, but I kept walking. And then I saw it. The coffin. Fully unearthed now. It lay tilted out of the ground, half collapsed. The lid askew. The wood was black and swollen, the iron fittings twisted and broken. The seam gaped wider than before, exposing a darkness inside that the light couldn't touch. I froze, my heart hammering. My throat tightened with the memory of that breath, that slow hiss rising from the soil. The voices stirred again. Not whispers this time, louder, clearer, filling the fog around me. "We are waiting," said we are awake. "And we are not done." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a stone. My flashlight beam jittered, cutting wild paths through the mist. And then I saw them, figures, dozens of them, standing among the graves. Still, silent, watching. Their faces were pale, their sockets hollow, their mouths open in soundless cries. They didn't move, didn't breathe, but I could feel their attention pressing down on me like a weight. I spun, searching for a way out, but the fog swallowed everything. The gate was gone, the path gone, only the figures, stretching endless in all directions. The voices rose higher, layered and relentless, crashing against my skull. "Your father fed us? Now you will too." Blood in the soil, bones in the dark. I clutched my head, the revolver heavy at my side. I wanted to fire, to do something, anything, but the figures didn't move. They only stared, empty eyes swallowing the light, and then, through the roar of voices, one broke clear. The same voice I'd heard beneath the angel statue. "My father's. You shouldn't have come back." I dropped to my knees, my chest tight, my vision swimming. My light rolled into the grass, beam flickering across the coffin. The lid shifted. Just slightly, enough to hear it. A groan, the sound of wood straining. I couldn't look away. My body shook as the lid edged higher, darkness spilling out like smoke. The voices fell silent all at once. The world held its breath, and then the coffin stopped moving. The gap remained, wide and waiting, but nothing came out. The silence was worse than the voices. It pressed against my skull, heavy and suffocating. I staggered to my feet, swaying. My flashlight beam trembled across the graves, across the faces that weren't faces. None of them moved. None of them blinked. And then slowly, they began to fade. One by one, melting into the fog until only the mist remained. The silence stretched on. My own breath sounded ragged and wrong. The coffin lay open, waiting, but nothing stirred within. I turned. My legs carried me blindly through the fog, stumbling over stones, slipping in the mud. My lungs burned, my throat raw, but I didn't stop. Not until the gate loomed out of the gray. I burst through it, slamming it shut behind me. The clang rang sharp in the stillness. I staggered to the car, nearly collapsing against the door. My hands shook as I pulled it open, dropped inside, and slammed the lock down. The engine was still running, the headlights still cutting weak beams into the mist. I put the car in gear and drove, faster than I should have. The road twisted beneath me, but I didn't slow. The fog thinned slightly as I left the cemetery behind, but it never vanished. Only when I reached town did I ease off the gas. My chest ached with each breath, my hands slick on the wheel. I parked outside the station and sat there, trembling, staring at the badge glinting on my chest. I told myself it was over, that I'd leave the cemetery behind, that I'd never go back. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. In the red glow of my taillights, the fog shifted, thick, heavy, and inside it, movement. Figures, standing still, watching. Hollow eyes staring through the mist, following me, and I knew then, with a certainty that hollowed me out. Leaving the cemetery hadn't ended it. The fog wasn't bound to that place. It was bound to me. It would follow me wherever I went, and it wasn't done. Not yet. I've been a sheriff in this county for almost 15 years. You'd think, after all that time, that I'd be used to the night shifts. The quiet roads, the lonely houses set back in the woods, the way the radio seems louder than it should when there's nothing but static between calls. But some nights feel different. That's what it was like the night I got called to patrol the cemetery. It was near the edge of town. A small patch of land fenced in with rusted iron. Old stones leaned in the dirt, some so weathered you couldn't read the names anymore. The place had been there longer than the town itself. At least that's what the records said. Folks buried their dead there back when the county was just farmland and mud roads. Most of the time, I didn't have a reason to drive by. But lately, people had been talking. Kids claimed they saw someone walking in the rows at night. A tall figure moving slow, disappearing when headlights touched it. There'd been reports of strange sounds, too. Voices, dragging footsteps. The kind of stories teenagers love to tell to scare each other. Normally, I'd write it off as nothing. But one family swore they saw someone standing by their grandmother's grave just after midnight. No car, no tracks, no reason for anyone to be out there. So I said I'd take a look. The gravel crunched under my tires when I pulled up that night. I left the engine running for a minute, listening. Nothing but cicadas and the faint hum of the power lines along the road. When I cut the engine, the silence hit me harder than I expected. The air smelled damp, like rain had passed through earlier, even though the sky was clear. I stepped out, flashlight in one hand, the other resting on the butt of my holster out of habit. I wasn't expecting trouble, but cemeteries have a way of making you feel like you should be ready for anything. The gate whined when I pushed it open. My boots scraped against the path as I walked between the headstones. I told myself it was just another patrol, nothing more. Just a routine check. But from the start, it felt wrong. It wasn't what I saw, because I didn't see anything. It was what I thought I saw. A flicker of movement just at the edge of my vision. A shadow slipping behind a monument, gone when I swung the flashlight toward it. I'd stand still, staring, waiting for something to move again, but there was nothing. The cemetery wasn't big. Maybe 24 rows of graves, a couple family plots with stone fences around them, and one old mausoleum up on the hill. I'd walked through it plenty of times before, but that night, every step made me feel like the place stretched further than it should. Like the path between the stones kept winding, drawing me deeper. I stopped by a grave near the center, shining my light across the grass. That's when I heard it. The soft crunch of leaves behind me. I froze. The sound stopped too. I turned slowly, the beam of my light cutting across crooked stones and wilted flowers left from funerals long ago. Nobody there. Just the wind stirring. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a raccoon or stray dog. But then I took another step, and I swear I heard it again. A faint shuffle, like someone walking just out of sight. I spun faster this time, heart thudding in my chest. Again, nothing. My throat felt dry. The silence had grown heavier somehow, pressing against my ears. Even the insects had gone quiet. I walked on faster than before, sweeping the light in wide arcs. I told myself it was just nerves, that I was letting ghost stories get in my head, but deep down, I knew I wasn't alone. At the far end of the cemetery, near the fence line, I stopped again. There was an old oak tree there, branches twisting over the graves like black arms. My light caught something moving beneath it. A shadow bending, then standing tall again, I shouted. My voice cracked in the night air. "Sheriff's Department? Who's there?" The figure didn't answer. I raised my flashlight, but when the beam hit, there was nothing. Just empty grass under the tree. I felt my skin crawl. I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't my imagination. Someone had been standing there, watching me. I backed away slowly, keeping my light on the tree. That's when I heard it again. Movement. Not behind me this time, but off to the side. Quick, soft steps, circling. I turned, light sweeping across the graves. The stones seemed taller now, leaning closer, like they were crowding me. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel it. Someone was walking with me. Just beyond the reach of the light, my radio crackled at my belt, the sudden noise making me flinch. But when I grabbed it, all I heard was static. No voice, no call. Just a hollow hiss. I didn't like the way my hands shook. I'm not a man who rattles easy. I've been through more than my share of late-night calls, domestic fights, meth labs in the woods, even a couple standoffs. But this was different. This wasn't something I could arrest or reason with. I kept walking, trying to make it to the mausoleum at the top of the hill. From there, I'd have a better view of the whole grounds. My boots crunched loud on the gravel, too loud, like they were warning whatever followed me exactly where I was. Halfway up, I heard it again. That faint scuff of a step. Close. Too close. I stopped. The sound stopped too. I held my breath listening. Then, just barely, I heard breathing. Not mine. Slow, ragged, like someone standing in the dark, not even trying to hide it. My heart slammed against my ribs. I raised the light, sweeping it across the headstones, the trees, the fence. Nothing. But the breathing. It was still there. I wanted to call out again, but my voice stuck in my throat. I just kept walking, faster now, almost jogging up the hill. When I reached the mausoleum, I leaned against the cold stone, catching my breath. The building was old, its doors chained shut, the name carved above the entrance too weathered to read. I shined my light out across the cemetery, trying to spot whatever was out there. At first, nothing. Just empty rows of stones under the pale moonlight. Then, movement. Not one figure this time, but several. Shadows shifting between the graves. Too many. They didn't move like people. They seemed to stretch and twist, gliding instead of walking. Every time I focused on one, it would vanish, only to appear somewhere else. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white. My gut told me to leave. To get in the car and drive, forget I'd ever come here. But my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, watching, waiting, as the shadows slid closer. The silence broke again. Not footsteps this time, not breathing. Just a single word, carried on the wind, my name. I heard my name. I don't know how long I stood frozen, but when I finally moved, I nearly stumbled down the hill. My light swung wildly as I ran, catching glimpses of movement at the corners of my vision. By the time I reached the gate, my chest was tight, my breath ragged. I didn't look back. Not once. When I reached the cruiser, I locked the doors, started the engine, and sat there with the headlights cutting through the fence. The cemetery lay still and empty, just rows of stones and dark grass. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake it. The feeling that someone was still there, watching, waiting, and I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I told myself I wouldn't go back to the cemetery. After that first patrol, I swore it was just nerves, shadows playing tricks on me, the weight of too many ghost stories in my head. That's what I said out loud. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The way I'd heard my own name whispered, drifting through the night air, it wasn't something I could explain away. It wasn't something I could forget either. For days it gnawed at me. Every time I tried to sleep, I'd hear that faint crunch of footsteps behind me. Sometimes I'd even wake in the dark, heart pounding. Sure, someone was standing just outside my bedroom door. So when the call came in again, a neighbor swearing they saw a figure drifting between the graves, I didn't even hesitate. I got in my cruiser, turned down the road, and told myself I'd put it to rest once and for all. The cemetery was darker that night. No moon, just heavy clouds overhead, the kind that swallow up any scrap of starlight. My headlights spilled over the iron gate, catching on the rust, and I felt that same pressure in my chest as before. I stepped out, shut the car door, and listened. The silence was thicker this time, heavier. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for me to walk in. I gripped my flashlight tighter, checked the radio at my side, and pushed the gate open. It gave the same drawn-out moan as before, like it was warning me not to enter. The air inside was colder, damp. My boots sounded too loud on the gravel path, each step echoing like I was walking into something's territory. I moved slow, scanning the rows with my light. Just stones, trees, broken fences. Nothing out of place, but then I heard it, a step, not mine. It came from behind me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I turned the light back the way I'd come. Empty path. My cruiser still parked at the gate. Nobody there. I stood for a long moment listening. My pulse hammered in my ears. Then I shook it off and kept moving. Another step, this time closer. I whipped around so fast my light bounced wildly across the graves. Still nothing, just the wind shifting the grass. But I knew what I'd heard. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was following me. I kept walking, but my pace quickened. Each time my boots hit the ground, I heard it. Another step just behind mine, like an echo that didn't belong to me. The rhythm was wrong. Heavy, uneven, dragging. I stopped suddenly. The sound stopped too. I started again, slower. One step, two steps. Then there it was, the faint crunch half a beat behind me. My chest tightened. I wanted to call out, demand whoever it was show themselves. But something in me held back. Some quiet, gnawing fear told me that if I spoke, if I broke the silence, it would answer. And I didn't want to hear that answer. I passed between two tall stones, the names carved into them long faded. The sound followed me in. My light swung back and forth, but the shadows just seemed to twist away, bending with the beam. I thought about turning back, but pride kept me moving forward. I'm the sheriff, I told myself. This is my job. I can't run from something I can't even see. Still, every instinct screamed at me to leave. The footsteps grew bolder as I went deeper, louder, heavier, no longer trying to hide. Each one matched me almost perfectly, but always just behind, like something was walking in my shadow. I tried to trick it. I stopped mid-step, spinning quick to shine the light behind me. But the moment I froze, so did it. And once again, nothing. Just the empty rows stretching into darkness. That's when I realized I wasn't going to catch it. Whatever was there didn't want to be seen. It only wanted to follow. The air grew colder as I climbed the small hill toward the mausoleum. My breath fogged in the beam of my flashlight. And still, the sound followed me, step for step. By the time I reached the top, my hands were trembling. I pressed my back against the cold stone of the mausoleum, the same spot I'd stood before, and scanned the grounds. The shadows seemed thicker that night, deeper. I could see the path below, but not the thing that haunted it. And then I heard it. Not footsteps this time. Breathing, right behind me, slow, ragged, like someone standing so close. I should have felt their breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, heart in my throat. My light flashed against the stone wall. Nothing. Empty air. But the sound didn't stop. I staggered back, nearly dropping the flashlight. The breathing circled me, moving from one side to the other as if it was pacing around me. I turned in frantic circles, light jerking across the graves, desperate to catch it. Still nothing. I wanted to run. My body screamed to flee, but my legs locked, rooted to the ground. I could only stand there as the sound grew louder, closer, until it filled my ears. Then, silence. Dead silence. The kind that sinks into your bones. I stood there shaking, waiting for it to return. But it didn't. The air was empty again. The night still. I forced myself down the hill, every step shaky, my light swinging too fast. The sound didn't follow this time, but the dread clung to me like a second skin. I felt it at my back, pressing in close, waiting for me to slip. When I reached the gate, I didn't look back. I shoved it open, climbed into the cruiser, and slammed the locks down. For a long time, I just sat there, gripping the wheel, staring out at the cemetery through the windshield. Nothing moved. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stepped out again, if I dared set foot past that gate, I'd hear it. That dragging step, that heavy, uneven tread. Always behind me, waiting, following. And the worst part, the part I can't admit to anyone else, is that I don't think it's just in the cemetery anymore. I've heard it on my porch at night. I've heard it in the hallway outside my bedroom, and sometimes, when I'm sitting alone in my office, I hear it in the silence, pacing just behind my chair. It never comes closer. It never shows itself. It just waits. And I know sooner or later, it's going to want more than to follow. It's going to want me to stop. I told myself I wouldn't go back. After the second night, after hearing those footsteps dogging me through the rows of graves, I swore I was done. But the thing about being a sheriff is, you don't get to walk away just because something scares you. Calls kept coming in. Folks living near the cemetery claimed they saw lights moving through the grounds. Some heard voices. Others said they woke in the small hours of the night to see a shadow standing at their window, only for it to vanish the moment they blinked. And every time, the reports circled back to the mausoleum, that old stone vault at the top of the hill. So I went back, against my better judgment, against the warning in my gut. I went back. The air was different that night. Still heavy, like a storm had settled over the town but forgot to break. Clouds covered the moon, and the cemetery was nothing but a sprawl of darkness. The shapes of gravestones hunched like broken teeth. I stepped through the gate, the hinges screaming, and for the first time, I didn't bother pretending this was routine. I gripped the flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. My free hand rested on my sidearm, not because I thought it would do any good, but because I needed the comfort of it. I walked the path, gravel crunching beneath my boots. My ears strained at every sound. A rustle of grass, the groan of a tree branch. My nerves lit up at each one, waiting for that uneven tread behind me. But the footsteps never came. That silence was worse. It was like the thing was holding itself back, letting me walk into something I didn't want to see. The hill rose ahead, black against the sky. The mausoleum crouched on top, its stone doors chained, the carvings above it weathered to nothing but scars in the rock. I hated that building. Every time I looked at it, I felt watched, judged. My boots slowed as I reached the base. My breath fogged the air, though the night wasn't cold enough for it. A wrongness hung in the air, heavy, unnatural. I climbed the hill anyway. Each step felt like it dragged me further out of the world I knew. At the top, I raised my light to the doors. The chain glinted, the lock rusted nearly through. I swept the beam across the stone. That's when I saw it. Two pale points in the dark. Deep inside the cracks of the vault, eyes. They were low at first, level with my own, but as the light touched them, they rose slowly, higher and higher until they were far above the doorway. Too high for anything human. I staggered back, the flashlight beam shaking. The eyes didn't blink. They just glowed faintly, reflecting back the light in a way no animal's eyes should. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to get off that hill, to never look at that vault again. But I couldn't move. Those eyes pinned me where I stood. And then I heard it, a sound from inside the mausoleum, low, wet, like something dragging itself across stone. The chain rattled on the door. I raised my sidearm, though I knew it was useless. My hand shook so badly I could barely keep the barrel steady. The sound stopped. The eyes didn't. They stared into me, unblinking, unchanging. I felt something in my chest, like my heart had stuttered, like my breath wasn't my own. My mind felt heavy, pulled down into the dark behind that stone. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes, maybe hours. Time didn't work right on that hill. Finally, I broke. I staggered back down the slope, not daring to turn my light away, but not able to keep myself from leaving. When I reached the bottom, the eyes were still there, watching me through the cracks. I backed down the path, flashlight trembling in my hand, until the hill faded into the black behind me. That should have been the end of it. I should have gone home, locked my doors, never set foot in that place again. But I couldn't, because that night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I saw them again. The eyes. They burned against the dark of my room, high above me, unblinking, and I heard it again, that wet dragging sound. Not from the cemetery this time. From the hallway, I lay frozen, my chest locked tight. My hand hovered inches from my gun, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The sound stopped outside my door. Silence. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after, and by the third night, I knew I had to go back. I had to see if the eyes were still waiting in the vault. Because if they weren't, if they'd left, that would mean they were here. I don't remember driving back to the cemetery. I just remember the need, a pull in my chest, like a string tied tight around my ribs, dragging me toward that hill whether I wanted it or not. The town slept while I went. No cars on the road, no porch lights burning. Just me and the weight of the dark pressing in on all sides. The cemetery looked worse than ever. The iron gate leaned open, its hinges groaning in the wind. The path beyond was swallowed in shadows. I could barely see the first row of stones, but I didn't hesitate. I walked straight in, flashlight clutched tight, boots crunching on the gravel. I didn't listen for footsteps this time. I didn't scan for shadows slipping at the corners of my vision. None of that mattered anymore. There was only one thing I needed to see. The vault. The mausoleum crouched at the top of the hill, heavier than the night itself. The air thickened as I climbed, cold and damp, like I was stepping into the bottom of a well. When I reached the top, I stopped. The chain was gone. The doors stood cracked open. I raised my light, but it barely touched the dark inside. It was like shining into a void. My breath came shallow, quick. My chest felt small, like there wasn't enough air in the world to fill it. Then I saw them, the eyes. Not behind the doors anymore, not waiting in the cracks. They were closer, right inside the threshold, staring out at me. I should have run. Every part of me screamed to run, but I couldn't. My legs felt nailed to the ground. My hand shook so badly the light danced across the stone. The sound came again, that dragging, wet shuffle echoing up from inside the vault. And then something stepped forward, not all the way into the light, not enough to see what it really was, just close enough for the shape of it to break the line of the doorway. Tall, wrong, shoulders too broad, head too low, like it had been stretched and twisted in ways that made no sense. The eyes burned brighter, and that's when it touched me. I didn't see it move. One moment it was there, half hidden in the doorway. The next, the cold was on me. A hand, if you could call it that, clamping down over mine, wrapping around my wrist where I held the flashlight. The light flickered. My vision swam. I couldn't breathe. The skin of its touch was like ice, but deeper than ice, like it sank into my bones, into my blood, and then it let go. I stumbled back, gasping, nearly dropping the light. The doorway was empty again, just stone and shadow, but on my hand, where it had grabbed me, a mark had spread. Black, twisted, like veins crawling out from my wrist, burned into the skin. I ran. I don't remember leaving the hill. I don't remember shoving through the gate or throwing myself into the cruiser. I only remember the mark and the way it throbbed as I gripped the wheel, spreading heat and cold through my arm. When I got home, I tried to wash it off, scrubbed until the skin bled, but the black lines didn't fade. They sank deeper like they'd grown beneath the flesh. And then came the dreams. At first, it was just the footsteps, heavy, uneven, pacing outside my door. Then the eyes, glowing at the foot of my bed, too high to belong to anything human. But after a while, the dreams weren't dreams anymore. I'd wake in the kitchen, standing at the window, staring out at the yard with no memory of walking there. I'd find dirt on my boots, leaves tangled in my cuffs. Once I woke standing in the middle of the cemetery path, dawn just breaking, the gate creaking in the wind. The mark had grown darker by then, branching out, crawling further up my arm, and sometimes I'd hear it whisper, not words I could understand, not in any language I'd ever heard, but I felt the meaning, deep in my bones. Promises, warnings. A voice telling me I wasn't alone anymore, that I'd never be alone again. I started locking the doors at night. Then I started nailing them shut. Didn't matter. I'd still wake somewhere else. Sometimes in town, sometimes back at the hill. Once, standing right in front of that open vault, the eyes burning down into me. I don't know if it's using me, or if it's becoming me, but the people in town, they've noticed. They don't look me in the eye anymore. They cross the street when they see me coming. I hear them whisper, They say I've changed. They're right. The mark has spread over my chest now. My reflection in the mirror looks wrong, blurred around the edges, like something's moving just beneath the skin. And the worst part? I don't even fight it anymore. At night, when I hear the footsteps, I don't lock the doors. I wait. When I feel the cold breath on my neck, I don't run. I stand still, because I know now what it wants. It doesn't want to kill me. It wants to walk with me, and sometimes, in the small hours before dawn, when I feel that hand settle over mine again, guiding me out into the night, I let it. We walk together. The sheriff and the thing from the vault, two shadows in the dark. And I know one night, I won't come back. One night, it won't let go. I've been sheriff of this town for over 15 years, long enough to know that the dead are supposed to stay where they belong, marked and accounted for. Births, deaths, marriages, it's all written down somewhere, neat and tidy, the way the living like to pretend we have control over things. But a few months ago, I started noticing gaps. Not big ones, just little smudges in the county's death records. Faded ink, a missing page here and there. At first, I thought it was nothing. Time has a way of eating paper the same way it eats people. But the more I looked, the more the pattern tugged at me, like a thread unraveling from an old coat. It began in the basement of the courthouse. The air down there is always damp, thick with mildew, the kind of smell that sticks to your lungs. Rows of cabinets line the walls, drawers full of brittle sheets that have been touched by more dust than hands. I'd been going through the files late one evening, lantern light throwing long shadows across the stone walls. I wasn't looking for trouble. Truth is, I was trying to distract myself. Sleep hasn't come easy these past years. Nights are too long, and the silence in my house presses down on me until I can't breathe. So I bury myself in old work. The drawer screeched when I pulled it open. Inside, files leaned against each other like tired old men. My fingers found a folder marked Burials, 1961. The paper crumbled at the edges, yellowed with age. I flipped through it slowly, the way you handle something fragile that doesn't belong to you. That's when I saw it. A name scribbled down in handwriting that looked rushed, almost desperate. Eleanor Hayes. Date of death, March 14th, 1961. Cause, undisclosed. Everything else, blank. No minister's signature. No cemetery lot listed. Just a name on paper and then nothing. A funeral without a funeral. I frowned and went back a few pages, then forward. Every other entry was neat, signed, sealed. Families listed, pastors, hymns sung. Eleanor's record stood out like a bruise. At first, I thought maybe the page had been damaged. Maybe the details had been lost in a flood or fire. But the ink was too sharp, too recent compared to the rest. As if someone had written it down after the fact and then forgot or refused to finish. The lantern hissed beside me, the flame trembling. The silence in that basement wasn't just silence. It was listening. I set the file aside, telling myself it didn't matter. Just a clerical error. Still, something about the name clung to me. I found myself whispering it under my breath. Eleanor Hayes. I'd never heard of her. Not in the stories the old folks tell, not in the town's gossip, not even in the police logs that stretch back decades. It was like she'd been born to die and nothing else. That night, I went home, but I couldn't leave her there. I kept thinking of that blank page, the unfinished record. People deserve more than that, don't they? Even strangers, especially strangers. The next morning, I went back. I told myself I'd dig deeper, just enough to settle my mind. That's the thing about curiosity. It doesn't feel dangerous when you start. It feels harmless, like scratching at an itch. But if you keep scratching, soon you're bleeding. The town archives stretch back over 100 years. Piles of death certificates, burial maps, lists of names carved into stone and then transcribed onto paper. I dug through them like a miner chasing gold. Hours passed. Dust clung to my uniform. My throat felt raw from the damp. But Eleanor Hayes never appeared again. Not once. Not in birth records, not in church logs, not in the cemetery blueprints. It was like she had been written into existence for that one moment, and then erased everywhere else. By dusk, my hands were black with ink and dirt. I leaned back, staring at the file I'd pulled. I should have stopped. I should have let her stay forgotten. But I couldn't. I called the clerk the next day, an old woman named Margaret, who's been working with county records longer than I've been alive. She knows every name, every face, every story worth telling. I asked her about Eleanor Hayes, and for the first time in all the years I've known her, Margaret looked unsettled. Her hands trembled when she adjusted her glasses. "Why are you asking about her?" she said. I told her the truth. I'd found the entry, and it didn't make sense. She shook her head slowly, her eyes fixed on the papers spread across her desk, like she was afraid to look at me. "Some things aren't meant to be kept," she whispered. When I pressed her, she clammed up, muttered something about misfiled records, then practically shoved me out of her office. I'd never seen her like that before. That was when I knew this wasn't just an accident. I spent the following week digging. I skipped sleep, skipped meals. The station radio crackled with calls I barely answered. All I could see, all I could think about was that name. I scoured newspaper archives, library shelves, even old obituaries on microfilm. Not a trace. And yet late at night, when I'd close my eyes, I'd hear a voice. Not clear, just a breath, a syllable, a sigh. Like someone leaning close to my ear and trying to remember how to speak. Sometimes it sounded like Eleanor. Other nights it was just a shiver in the dark. A wordless presence that made my skin prickle. By the second week, I'd stopped pretending this was just paperwork. I needed to know where she was buried. If there had been no funeral, then where was her body? Every grave in this county has a record, a lot number, a headstone. That's the rule. But if she wasn't in the books, that meant someone had buried her quietly, outside the order of things. That meant someone wanted her forgotten. I started cross-referencing names. 1961 wasn't that long ago, not really. Families still remember if you ask the right way. But when I asked around about Eleanor, people looked at me like I'd said a curse. A few turned pale. One man, old farmer named Grady, spat on the ground and walked away without a word. No one wanted to remember her. But I couldn't stop. It wasn't just duty anymore, it was obsession. The missing record gnawed at me in a way I can't explain. Like if I didn't find her, if I didn't uncover the truth, something would unravel. One night, back in the courthouse basement, I spread the burial maps across the floor. Each section of the cemetery carefully numbered, plotted, recorded. I traced my finger along the rows, muttering names as if speaking them aloud would anchor me, and then I saw it, a blank square, small, easy to overlook. The map was clean, precise, but there, in the northeast corner, one lot was unmarked. No number, no name, just a square of nothing. My breath caught in my throat. I checked the records. Every lot was accounted for except that one. On paper, it didn't exist. In reality, it was a piece of ground sitting silent among the rest, a patch of earth that had been left to the weeds. I knew it had to be hers. That night, I dreamed of it. The map, the empty square, the dirt sinking like quicksand. I woke with the taste of soil in my mouth, gritty between my teeth. I told myself it was just a dream, just exhaustion. But deep down, I knew Eleanor Hayes wasn't finished with me. The dead don't just vanish. They wait, and I had just found the trail she left behind. I drove out to the cemetery the next morning, though it wasn't planned. I told myself I was just going to pass by, just take a look at that corner I'd seen on the map. But I knew better. The wheel turned in my hands like it had its own will, and before I knew it, the iron gates stood in front of me, rusted and heavy, groaning when they opened. The air smelled different there. The grass around the graves was damp, carrying the weight of last night's rain. Mist clung to the ground, curling around the stones like fingers. The names carved into the markers stared back at me, silent. Reminders of every person who had been put here properly, remembered properly. I walked slowly, boots sinking into the softened dirt. Every step echoed too loud in my ears, though the world around me was hushed. Birds didn't sing. The wind didn't stir. It felt as though the cemetery was holding its breath, waiting. I reached the northeast corner. The ground was uneven, a patch of soil left wild while the rest was trimmed neat. Grass gave way to weeds, tangled and brown. No stone marked the spot, no flowers, just a hollow in the earth. sunken as if something beneath had collapsed in on itself. I stood there a long time, staring, listening. The silence pressed into me until I swore I could hear a faint sound, something like a sigh pushing through the soil. I dropped to my knees, brushing aside weeds, my hands working as if I couldn't stop them. The dirt felt softer here, looser, like it hadn't fully settled. I told myself I wouldn't dig. That wasn't my place, but curiosity has a way of breaking promises. I fetched a spade from the truck, and before long I was working the soil, my arms moving in a rhythm that felt both frantic and inevitable. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell became. At first it was just earth, damp and metallic. But then it shifted, turned acrid, sharp, like burning hair mixed with rot. It was wrong. Not the smell of death I knew from years on the job. Something older. Something that didn't belong to the body of a human being. The spade struck wood. The sound jolted through me like a gunshot. I cleared more dirt away until I could see it, a coffin, or what was left of one. The wood was gray, eaten through by years of damp, crumbling at the edges like ash. I pressed my hand against it, and the surface gave way under my palm, splintering. A rush of air hissed out, carrying that awful stench full into my face. I staggered back, gagging, wiping at my mouth. It burned my throat, my eyes, my whole body. Wanted to run, to get as far from that smell as I could, but I stayed. I leaned forward, pulling more of the wood aside. Inside, I expected bones, cloth, something human. But what I saw didn't fit any shape I knew. The coffin wasn't empty, but it wasn't right. Ash, piles of it, thick gray dust that clung to my fingers, that seemed to pulse faintly as though alive. Mixed in with it were fragments, shards of something brittle and white. Not bone, not exactly. Thinner, like shells, and the smell. It grew stronger the longer I looked, until my stomach churned. It wasn't just rot, it was chemical, metallic, bitter. It bit at the back of my tongue. I whispered her name without meaning to. Eleanor Hayes. The moment the word left my lips, the ash shifted. Only a little. Just enough for me to see the faintest stir, as though the dust had been disturbed by breath. I froze. For a moment, I thought it was my imagination, the wind, my own shaking hands. But then it happened again, the ash moving, settling, as though something beneath it had exhaled. The coffin creaked. The sound was soft, strained, but it was there. A weight pressing outward against the crumbling wood. My heart slammed in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it, to bury it back, to never speak of this again. But I couldn't. I leaned closer, and that was when I heard it. A voice, thin, muffled, breaking through the ash. Not words, not at first, just a sound, the bare edge of speech, like someone trying to form syllables with lungs full of dirt. I staggered back, hands trembling, the spade clattering to the ground. The voice stopped. The air grew still again, but the smell lingered. It clung to me as I filled the hole back in, my arms heavy, my breath shallow. I didn't cover it neatly. My hands shook too much, but I managed to hide it enough, pressing the earth down with my boots until the grave looked as it had before. When I stepped away, my head spun. The air around me shimmered faintly as though the heat of summer had suddenly risen from the ground. But it wasn't hot, it was cold. The mist curled tighter, reaching up to my knees, then waist, then chest. For a moment, I thought I saw shapes in it. Figures standing just beyond my sight, faces pale and waiting. But when I blinked, they were gone, and I was alone again. I stumbled back to the truck, hands shaking on the wheel as I drove. I left the cemetery behind, but the smell didn't leave me. It clung to my clothes, soaked into my skin. No matter how many times I washed, I swore I could still taste it on my tongue. That night, the house felt smaller. The walls leaned in close, the air heavy with that same acrid bitterness. I sat in my chair, lantern lit, staring at the window. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the coffin, the ash shifting, the faint stir like breath, and behind it, a face. Not fully formed, not clear, but there. Pale, hollow-eyed, pressing against the inside of my mind. I whispered her name again, softly, as though speaking it aloud might calm me. Eleanor Hayes. This time the floor creaked, not from the house settling, not from wind. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, careful, crossing the room toward me. I didn't move, couldn't move. My skin crawled, my body heavy, like the air itself pinned me down. The lantern flickered, shadows bending across the walls. And then it was gone. The sound, the weight, the presence. But I knew it hadn't left. Not really. The grave was open now. The coffin was broken. And what was inside had recognized me. It had heard me. And it wasn't going to stay forgotten. Sleep left me weeks ago. Ever since I opened that coffin, my nights have been nothing but shallow dozes broken by the weight of dreams I can't shake. I don't call them nightmares. They're too quiet for that. They're not violent. They're just watching. Every time I close my eyes, I see her, or what I think is her. The outline of a face pressed against the soil, lips moving, whispering in a voice I can't understand. The dirt shifts like water around her mouth, but the words never reach me. I wake with the taste of grit on my tongue, my teeth grinding sand that isn't there. The smell is still with me, that acrid sting. No soap can strip it away. Some mornings I catch it before I'm even out of bed, curling from my clothes, my hands, my very breath, like it's working its way deeper into my blood. I told myself to stay away from the cemetery, to leave it alone. But the more I tried, the more it pulled me back. Every time I looked at the map, that empty square drew my eyes. Every file I opened reminded me of the missing pages, the unfinished record. I thought about Margaret, the clerk, and the way her hands shook when I said Eleanor's name. She knew something. Maybe everyone did. And maybe I was the only fool who couldn't leave it buried. It was late afternoon when I went back. The cemetery lay quiet under a pale sun, the light filtered through thin clouds. I walked straight to that northeast corner, boots crunching over gravel, heart heavy in my chest. The patch of earth where I dug looked different. Not just disturbed, changed. The weeds were gone, replaced by bare dirt that seemed darker, wetter, though it hadn't rained. The ground sagged lower than before, like the earth itself had breathed out and caved in a little further. I stood there, hands in my pockets, telling myself not to touch it again. But my eyes caught something. A curve. A shadow. At first, I thought it was the play of light. Then I saw it clearly. A face, pressed into the soil. The features were faint, as if carved shallowly into clay, but they were there. Closed eyes, hollow cheeks, lips drawn tight. The face of a woman, half submerged in the dirt, staring upward without opening her eyes. I staggered back, pulse hammering in my throat. I told myself it was a trick, my imagination, shadows, roots, stones shaped by chance. But the longer I looked, the clearer it became. And then I saw another, to the left, near the weeds. A man this time, his mouth twisted open as if in a silent scream. The soil carried every line of his face, even the creases around his eyes. I turned in a slow circle, and that's when I realized they were everywhere. Faces, dozens of them. Some clear, some faint, all pressed into the ground like the earth had swallowed them whole and remembered their shapes. Mouths open, eyes closed, straining against the soil as if trying to rise. I couldn't breathe. My chest ached, the world narrowing to those silent, suffocating faces. Then the whispering began. It rose soft at first, so faint I thought it was the wind through grass. But the grass wasn't moving. The air was still. The whispers came from below, from the soil itself. A dozen voices, all tangled, overlapping, straining to be heard. Words too broken to understand, just syllables, sharp breaths, fragments that scraped at my ears. Some pleaded, some wept, some hissed through clenched teeth. I dropped to my knees without thinking, pressing my hand to the dirt as if I could steady it. The soil trembled faintly beneath my palm, warm, almost pulsing. The whispers grew sharper. I leaned closer, desperate to catch a word, a sentence, and then one voice rose above the rest. Clear. Female. Close. Sheriff. My blood froze. I jerked back, scrambling to my feet, eyes locked on the first face, the woman with closed eyes. Her lips had shifted. Not wide, not obvious, but enough. They were parted now ever so slightly, and I knew whose voice I had heard. Eleanor Hayes. I stumbled back until my shoulders hit the trunk of an old tree. My vision swam, the faces blurring into one another, the whispers surging into a chorus. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices were inside, deep, clawing their way through my skull. I shouted for them to stop, my voice tearing from my throat. And then, silence. I lowered my hands. The cemetery was still again. The faces were just soil, mouths closed. Eyes sealed, I told myself to leave, to never return. But even as I walked back to the truck, my legs shaking, I felt the eyes of the earth following me, watching through lids of dirt. That night, I didn't light the lantern. I sat in the dark, staring at the floorboards, listening. At first, there was nothing, just the settling creaks of an old house. But as midnight bled into morning, I heard it again, a whisper, low, patient. My name, breathed through the cracks in the floor. Sheriff. I pressed my hands to my ears, shut my eyes, told myself it was nothing. Just memory, just exhaustion. But when I opened my eyes again, I saw it, on the wall, in the faint light of the moon. Shadows forming shapes, hollow faces pressing outward from the plaster, mouths stretching soundlessly. I blinked, and they were gone. But I didn't sleep. Over the following days, the whispers followed me everywhere. In the station, as I sorted through reports. In the diner, over coffee gone cold. Even on the street, with townsfolk passing by, their lips moving in chatter, while beneath it all, I heard the hiss of the dead. No one else seemed to notice. People carried on as usual, smiling, talking, living. But when I looked too long at their faces, I thought I saw the soil beneath their skin shifting, waiting to break through. I stopped talking to Margaret. Stopped asking questions, but it didn't matter. The answers were already with me, pressed into the dirt, burned into my mind. The graveyard wasn't just a resting place. It was a mouth holding secrets too heavy for stone or scripture. And now that I'd opened it, it wasn't going to close. One evening, just before sunset, I drove past the cemetery without meaning to. My hands tightened on the wheel, my foot heavy on the brake. I didn't go in, but I saw it from the road. The northeast corner sagged deeper than before, a hollow pit now, as though the ground itself had swallowed something large, and for the briefest moment I thought I saw movement, the dirt rippling, as if something beneath was pressing up, trying to rise. I drove home fast, heart pounding, sweat dripping down my back. But when I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, I already knew. The faces weren't finished. They wanted more than whispers, and sooner or later, they would speak. I don't know what's real anymore. The days blur into nights, the nights into something else entirely. I go through the motions, put on the badge, answer the calls, nod at the townsfolk, but it all feels hollow. Their voices drift past me like static. Their faces melt into one another, shadows stretch too long under the sun. What lingers isn't the living, it's the whispers. They follow me now without pause, soft at first, like wind under the door. But when I'm alone, they rise. Dozens of voices pressing against me, filling my head until there's no room for thought. Sometimes they cry, sometimes they beg, sometimes they laugh in low, broken gasps. and threaded through all of it is her Eleanor. She says my name in a tone I can't describe. Not cruel, not kind, just certain, like she's known me longer than I've known myself. I've stopped answering the phone at night. I don't trust the sound of ringing anymore. Once I picked it up and there was no one on the line. Just the hiss of soil pouring through the wires, filling the silence until I had to hang up. I try not to sleep, but exhaustion drags me under. And when it does, I always dream of the graveyard. In the dreams, I'm standing at that corner, the northeast lot, the one with no name. The dirt shifts under my boots like a living thing. Faces rise in the soil, dozens, hundreds, mouths moving in silent prayer. They look at me without opening their eyes. And then they sink back down one by one like the earth is swallowing them again. But she stays, Eleanor. Her face presses up through the dirt until it nearly breaks the surface. Her lips part, whispering words I still can't understand. Each time I lean closer, desperate to hear. Each time the earth pulls me down with her, and I wake gasping, fists clenched around handfuls of sheets. This morning was different. I opened my eyes, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was. The air smelled of damp soil, that acrid sting filling my lungs. Light spilled across the floor, pale and gray, not like dawn, but like fog. I rose from the bed, but the boards beneath me didn't creak. They shifted, soft, as though I was walking on dirt instead of wood. When I looked around, the walls of my house were gone. In their place stretched rows of headstones, crooked and broken, vanishing into mist. I was in the cemetery again. I told myself it was a dream, but it didn't feel like one. The cold air pinched my skin. The taste of iron sat heavy on my tongue. The weight of the whispers pressed against me, thicker than ever before. They led me, pulling me forward like a tide. My feet carried me without thought, crunching over gravel, brushing past stones. The mist thickened, curling tight around my chest until I could barely breathe, and then I was there. The northeast corner. The ground had split wide open. No longer a sagging patch of soil, but a gaping wound in the earth. The coffin lay exposed, shattered to dust. The ash inside scattered by the wind, and in its place, faces, not just one or two, hundreds. They pushed against the sides of the pit, stacked upon one another, pressed so close their features blurred together. Mouths gaped wide, eyes sealed shut, skin made of dirt and stone. They shifted, writhing, straining to rise. The whispers roared into a chorus. I dropped to my knees at the edge, clutching my ears, but it made no difference. The voices weren't outside. They were inside, burning through me. I could feel their words rattling my bones, chewing through my thoughts. One voice cut through the rest, clear, calm, certain. Sheriff. I forced my eyes open, and there she was, Eleanor. Her face rose higher than the rest. Pale and hollow, hair tangled with roots, eyes still closed. Her mouth moved slowly, shaping each word with care. You found me. The earth groaned beneath us, the pit widening. The faces pressed closer, their whispers twisting into laughter, sobs, prayers. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I shook my head, choking out words I barely recognized as mine. What do you want from me? Her lips curved into the faintest smile. To be remembered. The faces surged upward, soil spilling over the edge of the pit, brushing against my boots. Hands formed in the dirt, clawing at my legs, pulling me closer. I fought, dug my heels in, but the ground gave way beneath me. I fell forward into the pit. The air filled with screams, mine, theirs, all tangled together. The soil closed around me, pressing against my chest, my throat, filling my mouth with grit. I thrashed, desperate for air, for light, for anything. But the faces surrounded me, their mouths moving against my skin, whispering their names into me, searing them into my mind one by one, and through it all, Eleanor's voice guided them, calm, steady, eternal. I woke at dawn, lying on my bedroom floor. The boards were intact. The walls still stood. The house was the same. But my clothes were soaked with dirt. My hands were stained gray, the lines of my palms filled with ash, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see myself. Not fully. Behind my reflection, faint but certain, a face stared back. Eyes closed. Mouth whispering words I couldn't. Heard on Eleanor Hayes. I don't know if I ever left the graveyard. Maybe I never will. I've walked that graveyard nearly every day for the last 15 years. It's not exactly something I like to admit, but the truth is, I've always felt more at home among the dead than the living. Maybe it's the quiet. Maybe it's the way the air hangs heavy there. Like time itself slows down once you step past the gate. Maybe it's just the fact that nobody bothers the sheriff if he spends his lunch hour among old stones and names nobody remembers. But there's something else I have to admit. Something I haven't told anyone. There's always been someone out there. I first noticed him, at least I think it's a him, about 3 years back. Beyond the far fence, past the last row of graves, standing in the thick brush where the woods begin. Not close enough to make out a face. Not close enough to even know if I'm looking at a person. Just a figure. A still, dark outline that doesn't move. Most folks don't see him. They don't look that far. But I notice, every time, the fence out there is rusted through in places, bent low in others. The metal is sharp, eaten by years of rain. Nobody's kept it up. That side of the graveyard doesn't get many visitors, since most of the names on those stones are older than the town itself. They crumble if you touch them. Some have sunk halfway into the earth, tilting like crooked teeth. It's there at the farthest edge that I always see him. I've told myself it's just a trick of the eyes. Maybe a tree stump or a shadow, but I've been a sheriff too long to believe my own excuses. You learn the weight of being watched. You feel it on the back of your neck, even before you can prove it. And I swear to God, whenever I stand by that fence, I feel him staring. I don't move closer. I never do. There's no real reason for me to. He doesn't step inside the graveyard. He doesn't cross the fence. He just stands there, in that same patch of brush, the way a scarecrow stands guard over a field. But sometimes I think I see him lean just slightly. Like he's straining forward, as if the fence is the only thing keeping him from stepping through. I don't know why it bothers me so much. I'm a lawman. I've faced drunk husbands with shotguns, meth heads swinging broken bottles, kids with nothing to lose and too much anger in their veins. But this still figure beyond the fence, it knots something deep inside me. Because he doesn't move. He doesn't leave. And the worst part is, I don't think he ever blinks. There was one afternoon, cloudy, heavy sky, the kind of day when the air feels damp, even if it's not raining, when I sat on the bench near the soldiers' stones. I looked up and there he was. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel it. His eyes. Locked on me. I tried to ignore it, but after 20 minutes I couldn't take it anymore. I stood and faced him. My throat was dry. I wanted to shout something, ask who he was, what he wanted, but the words wouldn't come. I felt like a child again, frozen in place, heart thudding, knowing something was wrong but too afraid to stir it. So I did what I always do. I left. I walked back to my cruiser, hands shaking, eyes on the gravel path until I was out of sight. That was months ago. And still, every time I go there, he's waiting. Always beyond that rusted fence. Always watching. I know what you're thinking. Maybe it's some old drifter, maybe it's a hunter trespassing in the woods, maybe it's nothing at all. Believe me, I've thought of all that. But people move. People don't just stand there, rain or shine, morning or evening, and yet, he does. I've tested it. One morning, just after dawn, I went out earlier than usual, thinking maybe I'd catch the figure off guard. But when I reached the far side of the yard, there he was. Already there. Already still. Another time I drove by the graveyard after dark, headlights sweeping across the stones. I slowed down near the far fence. For a moment I thought maybe he'd be gone, but no. Just a darker shape in the darkness, unmoving. It's not natural. There's something about that fence itself that unsettles me. It's not just the rust or the way it leans into the weeds. It's the way it feels final. Like a border between here and somewhere else. I don't mean the woods. I mean something beyond that, something not meant to cross. I've caught myself staring at it longer than I should, running my hand along the corroded metal, feeling the bite of it under my fingers. Sometimes I wonder if the fence was ever really built to keep people out, or if it was built to keep something in. And the figure, whatever he is, just stands there, waiting. I try not to let this get in my head, but it's hard. I've noticed changes in myself. I don't sleep as easily as I used to. I wake up at night, heart pounding, thinking I heard footsteps outside my window. I've even started to avoid the graveyard, which is strange because it used to bring me peace. Now it feels like a test. Every step I take down that path, I know he'll be there, waiting for me at the edge. I don't tell my deputies. They'd think I'm losing it. Maybe I am. But I know what I see. And deep down, I know it's not just some shadow, not just some tired old man wandering the woods. It's something else. Something patient. And patience is worse than any weapon. I should mention one more thing. Something small, but it gnaws at me. A week ago, I went to the far fence and tried to be brave. I didn't cross it. God knows I couldn't bring myself to. But I got close. Close enough that I could see the brush clearly, the trees behind it, even the split bark of the pines. There was no figure, no shadow, nothing at all. I stood there, letting myself breathe for the first time in months. My shoulders dropped. My heart slowed. Maybe it really was all in my head. Maybe I'd been haunted by nothing. But then, before I turned away, I felt it. That prickle on the back of my neck. That weight, I didn't want to look, but I did. And when I raised my eyes, he was there, closer this time. Not in the brush, not at a distance. He was right at the fence, standing just beyond the rusted bars. I don't remember walking away. I only remember the sound of gravel crunching under my boots, my breath breaking, my chest aching, until I was safe in the cruiser with the doors locked. I haven't been back since. But I know I'll have to, because he's still there, and he's waiting. I told myself. I wouldn't go back. After what happened at the fence, after seeing him so close, I swore I was done with that place. But you know how it is with certain fears. They don't leave you alone just because you try to ignore them. They sit heavy in your chest, pulling at you until you finally give in. That's what the graveyard became for me. Not just a place I used to walk, not just quiet ground. It became unfinished business. And I couldn't stand the thought of being too afraid to face it. So one night, I went back. The moon was thin, barely a sliver, and the air had that cool bite of early fall. I parked my cruiser off the road, not wanting anyone to see me there. I didn't tell a soul. I just stepped through the gate with a flashlight in hand, boots crunching softly against the gravel. The graveyard looks different at night. The stones feel taller. The air feels thicker. Even the silence has a weight to it, pressing down on your ears. I told myself I was prepared. I told myself I'd walk straight to the far fence, shine the light, and finally prove to myself there was nothing there. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The beam of my flashlight swept over names I couldn't read, over angels with broken wings, over cracks in the earth that looked deeper than they should. And every step I waited for it. That moment when I'd see him again, standing where he always stood. But he wasn't there. When I reached the fence, there was nothing beyond it. Just the line of trees, dark and still. Just brush and shadows. The relief should have been enough to calm me, but it wasn't. It didn't feel right. The silence wasn't peaceful, not the way it used to be when I walked there in daylight. This was something else. It was like the whole world was holding its breath. I shut off the flashlight. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd see better without it. Maybe I just wanted to test myself, to stand in the dark and face whatever might be there. That's when I realized something. The night has sounds, crickets, wind, the creak of trees. But here, in that moment, there was nothing, just dead quiet. And in that silence, I felt it again, that weight, that stare. I turned slowly toward the trees, my eyes strained, trying to adjust, trying to find shape in the black. For a long moment, there was nothing, just emptiness. But then, two eyes. They weren't glowing, not exactly, but they caught the light of the moon just enough to shine, pale, wet, reflecting back at me from the brush. I froze. I couldn't breathe. My throat locked and my knees wanted to give. The eyes didn't move. They just stayed there, steady, unblinking, locked on me. I don't know how long I stood there. Seconds, minutes. It felt like forever. My skin prickled, my mouth went dry, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it would tear its way out. Finally, I forced myself to move. I clicked the flashlight back on, the beam cutting through the dark. But the eyes were gone. The brush was empty. The trees stood still. Nothing. I stumbled back from the fence, swinging the light side to side, searching, desperate to find what I'd seen. But there was nothing there. No footprints, no sound, no figure in that silence. It stayed, heavy, crushing. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Some stubborn part of me held on, saying if I left now, I'd never come back. That I'd always be haunted by it. So I stood my ground. I called out. My voice cracked, but I called anyway. "Who's there?" The sound of my own voice made me jump. It felt wrong in that silence, too loud, like it didn't belong. No answer. I called again, louder this time. "Show yourself." Nothing, and then, I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't movement. It was more like a change in the air itself. A shift, sudden and sharp, like the world on the other side of that fence took one step closer. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. My skin went cold, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in a breath. That was enough. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and walked fast. Too fast to be calm, too slow to be running, back across the graveyard. My light shook in my hand, throwing wild shadows across the stones. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. Because I knew. I knew those eyes were still on me. Watching. Following me all the way to the gate. When I reached the cruiser, I slammed the door shut and locked it like a fool. My breath fogged the glass as I sat there, gripping the wheel, waiting for my pulse to slow. But it didn't. Even as I drove away, headlights cutting through the back road, I could feel it. That stare, as if those eyes had burned themselves into me, like I carried them with me now. And the silence, that unnatural silence. It lingered. It followed me home. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my chair with the lights on, gun on the table, and waited for morning. But the morning didn't make it better. Nothing looked different. The sun came up, the world went on, people drank their coffee and went to work. But something had shifted inside me. I can't shake the feeling that I crossed some kind of line. That by going back at night, by standing there in the dark and meeting those eyes, I invited something in. And now, it won't leave. I used to think once I left the graveyard behind, I could leave it behind completely. I was wrong, because it didn't stop with the night. It didn't stop with the fence or the eyes in the dark. No, it followed me home. Not in any obvious way, not in shadows moving in corners or footsteps in my hallway. It followed me in the small, impossible ways, in the cold that creeps along the backs of my arms when I'm alone, in the sudden prickle of the skin at the base of my neck, like a whisper that tells me someone is there. I try to convince myself it's stress. Too much work, too little sleep. But I know better. I know that weight, that sense of being watched. It doesn't leave because it can't leave. It started subtly at first. The first night I was in my living room watching old footage from the town fair. The screen cast a pale glow across the room, and I felt warm, safe, like any normal night. Then it happened. A movement at the edge of my vision. A shadow, quick and fleeting, gone before I could turn fully. I froze. Breath caught. Heart pounding like it wanted to escape my chest. I told myself it was nothing. I was imagining it. Maybe a trick of the light, maybe a stray leaf blowing past the window outside. But then it happened again. And again, it wasn't just shadows. Sometimes it was the faintest sound. A scrape against the floor, almost like a chair moving, but nothing had moved. A low whisper, or maybe the creak of the house settling, but louder, heavier, like it was meant for me, and always. That feeling, that presence, watching. I started checking the doors and windows obsessively. Every lock, every latch, every hinge, nothing, no signs of entry. No forced locks, just him, or it. Whatever it was, it didn't need doors. It didn't need windows. It just existed, and it knew I was there. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see it. Had to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. I went to the window that faced the backyard. It's a small yard, fenced, but not with anything like the graveyard fence. No rust, no history. Just ordinary wood and wire. I pressed my face against the glass. At first, there was nothing. Just the empty yard, bathed in the silver light of the moon. Then, across the yard, I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the fence, tall, dark, unmoving. its head tilted slightly as if it could see me through the glass, through the walls, through the locks. I slammed back from the window, my chest heaving. My hands cold and clammy, it didn't move. Not when I yelled, not when I switched the lights on and off, not when I grabbed the flashlight to look outside. Because it never moves, it just waits. Sleep became impossible. I started sleeping in short bursts, lights on, door locked, curtains drawn. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the fence at the graveyard, imagined those eyes in the dark, imagined him standing there, waiting. I dreamt of the fence bending, reaching for me. I dreamt of him walking across it, slow and patient, each step deliberate. And when I woke, I felt it still. That presence, just behind me in the corner of the room where I couldn't see it, but could feel it. I thought about quitting, thought about leaving town, abandoning my house, leaving everything behind. But I can't, not entirely. Some part of me refuses to run. Some part of me knows it would follow, because I've learned something. This isn't a visitor. This isn't a stranger. This isn't even a person. It's patient, and patience is worse than any weapon. One evening, I tried to fight back. I wanted to see if I could make it leave. I stood in the middle of my living room, flashlight in hand, and called out, "I see you! Leave!" Silence. Then the air shifted. The hairs on my arms rose. My skin prickled. And I knew, without looking, that it had heard me. I tried to shine the light around the room to find it, to catch it. But the beam fell on empty walls, empty corners, ordinary furniture. Nothing. But the feeling didn't leave. It stayed. I realized something crucial then. It didn't need to be seen to exist. It didn't need to make noise, didn't need to cross a door. Its power comes from knowing I know it's there, knowing I can't escape it, knowing I'm trapped in a world where it is patient, and I am not. I sat down, flashlight still in hand, hands shaking, and I understood what the graveyard had been all along. That fence, the far edge, the still figure beyond it, it was a warning, a promise. Days passed, blending into nights. Every glance outside, every creak of the house, every shadow in a corner was a reminder. I stopped answering the phone when it rang late. I stopped looking out windows. I barely slept, ate little, barely spoke to anyone. My world shrank until it was nothing but my living room, the street outside, and the unseen watcher lurking beyond every edge of perception. And then, one night I thought I saw it. Not at the graveyard, not even in the yard outside, but at my front door. A shadow, taller than a man, stretched across the porch under the weak porch light. I froze, heart thundering. I wanted to open the door, to face it, to prove to myself it wasn't real. I didn't. I couldn't. And when I blinked, it was gone. But I knew it hadn't left. I know what people would say if they saw me now. "You're losing it. It's stress. It's too much work, too little sleep." Maybe they're right. Maybe I am. But I know what I feel. That presence, that patience, that waiting, I know I'll see it again because it never leaves. Even now, as I sit here, writing this down, I feel it. Behind me, just out of sight, patient, quiet, watching, always watching, I've stopped trying to fight it. There's no point. All I can do is wait. Wait and hope that somehow it doesn't step closer. Because if it does, if it ever crosses the line, the fence, the walls, the doors, I don't know if I'll survive seeing it. And somehow, I don't think anyone else would either. I am not safe. And I know now with every fiber of my being. It never left. It is always there watching,